Chapter 1 There is a road at the foot, blue stone paving, and the life and death of the gully, which is called the Yellow Spring. Looking up at a river, the dark green river water reflects this life, it is Wangchuan. A bridge on the river, with fate as the step, forgotten all the dust and fame. There is a stone at the end, and when you look back on one's rebirth, the dust will be broken, that is, the three lives. Huangchuan Road, Wangchuan River, Nahi Bridge, Sanshung Stone. Destiny is reversed, reincarnation is long, stop, stop. Look, these few sentences are so generous, transparent, and heavy. It's a pity that it was accompanied by a small tune from Jiangnan Wunong's soft language, and it was named Why Both. These few words have been floating in the sparkling Wangchuan for a year. When Ayin first saw it, it was really shocked for a few days. Only when she saw the hanging ghost floating in Wangchuan humming this Jiangnan soft tune with a long tongue, and poking her heart like a thunder, she no longer had any illusions about the world song that the ghost world is proud of. After Ayin died, the thing she felt most regrettable from the bottom of her heart was this. It is said that this term was made by Aoge, the lord of the ghost world, in order to keep the three realms living on the Nahi Bridge who had been thinking hard for 100 years. On the day of Dachan, Aoge amnesty the ghost world and invites the fairy demon of the three worlds to congratulate him. As soon as the word came out, it spread in the three realms for a while. Everyone was proud and compassionate of the ghost king, and she was full of admiration. It's a pity that the banquet went on for a few days, and the hanged ghosts in the hall leaned against the Jiangnan miner in the small hall of the banquet hall and sang for a few days in colorful costumes. When the banquet was over, the fairy demon king who participated in the banquet was carried out of the ghost world by the ghost chase, regardless of the depth of his way. Ever since the ancient True Baiju used his body to pay homage to the tribulation of chaos, and the ancient world was closed again, in the 8 desolations that have been calm for hundreds of years, this is the most absurd thing to count. Of course, the superb appearance of the Ghost King Aoge has also spread to everyone in the sky and the earth, and the beautiful fairy demon flying around in the underworld in Chingri suddenly increased. Ever since Ayin had learned the tragic experience of the celestial demon from which little devil's mouth was broken, the heart that had been pierced by dying finally became relieved. Seeing that it's a little farther around, let's go back to the Nahi Bridge on Wangchuan. In fact, no one is so mysterious and terrible. The Nahi Bridge at the end of Huangchuan Road is just an ordinary slab bridge. The only thing that is rare is that this bridge connects the cycle of life and death. There is a green stone table in the middle of the bridge with a green bowl on it, and I see that the life is good. Sitting lazily on the bridge was a ghost with a green robe. Turn your head, oh ho, this skin is not covered. Every day the soul of Nahi Bridge falls into Wangchuan because of this person's appearance. This ghost is wearing a brocade crown on his head, the cuffs are inlaid with pure gold thread, and the belt is hung with Nantian warm jade. Just a robe, it takes 100 years of silk from Yungzi Mountain's fairy silkworm to be woven, and the skin on the black boots is sturdily taken from the body of the cloud-swallowing beast from the demon world. In a word, this person is not right. This ghost is pretty and expensive. Yo, Ayin, you're back, come and talk to me for a while. Maybe it's because God has a good life in the past few days. There are not many people who die. However, the ghost has fallen in the sky. This ghost is boring. When he looks back at the familiar face coming from the bridge, his mouth is raised, and the whole face is suddenly bright. If the chrysanthemum. Ayin glanced at him slowly, then walked up the stone steps, and stopped beside the ghost with 2 legs dangling. Slowly stretched out his hand and only raised his eyes a little bit. Give it to me, remember to warm it up. 3-year-old children know what to drink on Nahi Bridge. Unexpectedly, the ghost shook his head, 1,000 unhappy. Baba looked at her and blinked to ask for credit. Ayin, don't panic, let's chat. This time I entrusted you to the richest royal, your life will always be a happy life, with power, and Xiao Erlang too. Seeing that Ayin didn't respond, he touched his chin and pinched his fingers. It's not right. You were only 17 or 8 years ago when you were sent away last time. You are a princess of a country. Why did you die so early? The air can't resist your bad luck? Or is that cowardly courageous? Are you dying of grief again? He said that he was going to touch the sparkling waves of Wangchuan to see Ayan's situation in this life. Ayan Yanxi looked up and took a look at him. Zhihuan Gijun, don't have to look at it. The cohort in this life is a good man, but he got seriously ill as soon as I got married and went away within a year. I'm a princess. It's true, but I can't stand the reputation of cough, caught the wind and cold, and died of illness. She spoke calmly, as if she was talking about other people's lives. This ghost calling for Zhihuan is not surprised, and smiles gently. Then you don't have to be reborn, Ayan, you are a destined ghost. I see you stay in the underworld and guard me. Huangchuan Road is good. Ayan snorted, seeing Zhihuan alone, and thinking about it, he jumped onto the bridge and couldn't help but bury Tai. What you said when I was reincarnated in my last life, this time I will live a long and peaceful life. Ellie, you don't think it's a horrible life? Zhihuan is quite innocent, I can't blame me for this, your fate is already the most wealthy in the world. Ayan snorted and sighed, holding his chin in melancholy. Yes, I can't complain, I'm all entrusted to the royal family. Is it true that as Zhihuan said, she was destined to kill her, destined to be a broom? Ayan is a ghost, or a very old ghost. Although his appearance was ordinary, he was lucky enough to hug the thigh of Zhihuan Gijun, who has the name Ghost seeing sorrow in the underworld. As the old saying goes, the king is good to see, and the little ghost is hard to deal with. Immortals, demons, and monsters can't escape reincarnation. The status of ghosts guarding Huangchuan Road in the Three Realms has been subtle since ancient times. Since when Zhihuan stayed at Nahi Bridge is impossible to test, I only heard that Zhihuan Ghost Lord has an unfathomable appearance in addition to being angry and resentful. Such a mysterious and powerful Kyogi-jun willing to stay at the head of Nahi Bridge for hundreds of thousands of years is also a rare thing. The fate between him and Ayan is that there are some drops of water that pierced through the iron rod and turned into needles. Ayan is a ghost who doesn't remember the past. This is a bit wrong after careful consideration. Ayan just doesn't remember her past in the ghost world. Ghosts are invisible, and they transform into form by the way. Ayan knew that her soul was shattered from the memory, and she didn't even have the qualifications to reincarnate. She would be raised in the bottom of the underworld for 100 years before she could transform into a big girl. Everywhere in the world is the weak and the strong. She was able to condense her soul into shape, and she really suffered something unknown to outsiders. She considers herself open-minded, her soul is gone, and she has forgotten the awful things that appeared in the underworld inexplicably. After she made up her mind to set foot on the innocent reincarnation of Nahi Bridge, she didn't bother to think about it anymore. Zhihuan didn't notice her at first. There are thousands of ghosts in the underworld. How could he remember an inconspicuous female ghost? But he couldn't bear Ayan's weird and sad life, and he stood on the Nahi Bridge for the 15th time. After holding back his anger and asking him if he could give a good life, Zhihuan had such a slight impression of her. It was also due to the fate of the two. Zhihuan Gijun, who always looked at jading and indifferent to everyone, gave Ayan a good face, and even took pains to watch her road to reincarnation. From this look, Zhihuan was intrigued. It has been more than 300 years since Ayan was reincarnated for the first time, and Nahi Bridge has gone through more than a dozen times. In each life, he must live no more than 20, and he will die for love. Zhihuan discovers that she is a strange ghost. Others have drunk menpo soup and walked over Nahi Bridge. The past life has been forgotten, and every life is empty and white. Well, she didn't remember when she was reborn as a human being. Once her braids became ghosts, her life in the past would be recounted in her mind. The first few times Ayan could bear it when he walked the Nahi Bridge, he quietly drank Mengpo Tang and went on the road. Until the 15th reincarnation, I finally couldn't help but bear the burden. When you are alive, you will decline. If you die, you will remember the fate of each life. Even if Ayin is a ghost who has only tossed to death, she still feels that God is a bit unkind. The ghost of Xiaoyan has guarded the Nahi bridge for thousands of years, and has never seen such a ghost abandoned by people and gods. Besides, the ghosts he faces every day are lifeless ghosts waiting to be reborn, and none of them can remember every encounter in the underworld like Ayin, so the two of them feel irresistible when they come and go. It is said that there are people in the government that are easy to handle, and Ayin is not implicit, and has been forcing Xiaoyan to find good people for her in the past few lives. Xiaoyan is accustomed to things, and I don't believe that Ayin is so unlucky. He is very concerned about this matter. I find it better in my first life than in my first life. So after another 10 lives, no, this time, she will be sent to the royal family. It's a pity that for 500 years, this hapless ghost girl still has such a bad luck. It's only been 18 years now, and I've got another braid. Ayin. Xiaoyan stretched out to poke Ayan's shoulder, then pointed upwards. I think you are born with a predestined relationship with the underworld, and you are not suitable for being a person, so just be a ghost. If it's a chance, properly and cultivate well, you may be able to achieve consummation in the future and ascend to the god realm. Ayan Bei glanced at him and snorted, Xiaoyan, you treat me as the little devil back then. In the past few hundred years, even Shangjun has rarely appeared in the 3 realms, let alone God. The realm mentioned by Xiaoyan is the ancient realm, and it is completely in 2 dimensions with the 3 realms. I heard that to enter the realm, at least a half-god mana is required. She is a low-level ghost, so she can have such delusions and good luck. Xiaoyan is used to nonsense, this time the nonsense is a bit far away. Xiaoyan touched his nose, a little bit ridiculous, but not reconciled. Oh, girl, even if you don't ascend to the god realm, it's not bad to stay in the underworld. These years, the Ghost King has treated the underworld like a paradise, don't believe it. He said, inviting credit, and waved towards Wang Chuan. The sparkling water dispersed, and the splendid scene of the corner of the underworld appeared in front of the two of them. There is always only dark night in the netherworld. At this time, the Anhua street in front of the ghost hall is full of hustle and bustle. Hundreds of large lanterns float over the netherworld. There are stalls selling lanterns on the nearby road, and the hall of the Ghost King is not far away with red lanterns and colorful silk. Ayan then remembered that the day of her death in this life was the 15th day of the first lunar month. It's a pity that the World Reunion Day is when she is on the road alone. They are all dead. These ghosts really like tossing around. Ayan has been tossing for 500 years for the good fortune of his life. There is no leisure to see others comfortable, she is slanderous in her heart, wondering when to drink the soup and go on the road. Ayan yawned and turned his head to see that Xiaoyan was a single figure, really pitiful, so he wanted to accompany him for a while before reincarnation. Ayan, do you think the underground palace is like the world? You stay and be a ghost. Xiaoyan didn't see Ayan's yawning face, and he persevered in preparing to make Ayan's ghost book an iron case. Ayan didn't bother to pay attention to him, waved his hand perfunctorily, glanced at the corner of the water mirror inadvertently, and was slightly startled. The bridge fell silent for a while. Xiaoyan followed her eyes. At the corner at the end of the street, a young man stood quietly. He was dressed in white, standing upright under the peach tree on the corner of the street, and his cold and white figure smashed the eyes of the dark underworld. Countless ghosts passed by the peach tree, but did not dare to approach him for half a minute. This person is surrounded by immortal spirits, and at a glance, you can see that he is a rare upper immortal. In the pavilions on both sides of the street, there were countless female ghosts watching him with blushing and cautiously, and there were even immortals hidden among them. According to Ayan, half of the excitement in the underground palace tonight was caused by him. But the indifferent aura of his whole body has transformed the peach tree into his detached territory within half a meter, as if anyone who takes a look at this place more is a blessing for Sans Hung. It doesn't seem to be a simple lord, Yin touched his chin, his eyes slid upward. At one glance, Yin almost fell into Wang Chuan half of his body. Oh, this look is too handsome, as well as the noble Wen Jun who swells into the bones. Yin dares to hold the assurance of conscience with the countless eyes of her husband for more than 20 years, this immortal, is a high-class goods. Chapter 2 Hey, girl, look silly. Xiu Yan glanced at Wang Chuanzong's face, immediately unhappy. He is the undisputed first beautiful man in the ghost world. Yin never saw even eyeballs when he saw him. I almost fell out, so he added carefully, it's far worse than me, what's so good to see? Yin retracted his eyes and was too lazy to open his eyes to tell Li Zihuan and talk nonsense. He rubbed his hands and asked, who is this fairy? Yin's whole body was almost parallel to the water mirror, hanging in the air on Wang Chuan. Fortunately, she is just a light and fluttering ghost now, otherwise she would not be able to make such a breathtaking action. Zihuan's wicked eyes slammed his mouth and said, don't think about it, this is the Pushang Lord of Day's Mountain, one of the successors of the next heavenly emperor. Oh! It was actually a candidate for the next emperor of heaven, and the difference in status was like the moon in the sky compared to the underworld. Yin slapped his tongue and had to withdraw his eyes with regret, but still couldn't help but pry into gossip. How did he come to the underworld with an identity like him? Zihuan leaned back in the air lazily, and sighed infrequently, I know a little bit about this. 600 years ago, a female fairy fell in love with the demon emperor and helped him destroy the spiritual mountain of the immortal world and slaughter the immortals. The three realms were in great chaos. Later, the two clans fought in Raxhati, and the demon emperor was seriously injured and lost. The female fairy died, and the two clans were considered to have ceased. Hey, how much effort was spent by the true god Baiju in order to protect the three realms and die? That female fairy can actually ruin the harmony of the two races, it is also capable. What does it have to do with his coming to the underworld? When Yin turned into a ghost, this earth-shattering battle had already passed for 100 years, and she had been reincarnated in these years, and she had vaguely heard of it. Zihuan scratched his chin and continued to break history. I heard that the female fairy who fell in love with the demon emperor is the sweetheart of Pushang Shangjun. Even if the fairy dies, she will reincarnate. He came to the underground palace to find it. The soul of the female fairy. Yin was quite surprised, that female fairy has betrayed him, and he is still willing to come to find her soul, really affectionate. She glanced at Pu Shang in the water mirror, but felt he was pitiful, with a little voice. Ching, it's been so many years, he hasn't found it yet. Zihuan shook his head, the female fairy died under the Yuan Shen sword. Even the demigod who received this sword will be the end of the Yuan Shen's dispersal. There will be souls left in the world. He just doesn't believe it, plus the two there are some old feelings between them, so I will find peace of mind every year. The words were strange to scoring. Yin was taken aback, turned his head, heart at ease? What do you mean? I forgot to tell you. Zihuan smiled, his eyes were quite unpredictable, the Yuan Shen sword is a universal weapon. Within the three realms, only he can use it. As the name suggests, only the white-clothed youth under the peach tree can kill the female fairy with the Yuan Shen sword in the world. How much hate is it to personally let the soul of the beloved person fly away and destroy her in the world? Or is it for the three realms avenue, willing to abandon the lover who betrayed the immortal clan? Hearing such a bleak story turned out to be such a bleak ending, Yin's heart was blocked, which was quite unpleasant, and for a while, his chest felt cold and painful. More than 500 years ago, in order to gather the soul, she forcibly took the soul-changing pill, which caused cold to the yin, and the erysipelas invaded the soul body, causing the old problem of heart palpitations in every life. Cherish the blessing, she who survived at the bottom of the underworld can also reincarnate. It was originally a great blessing, at least better than the female fairy who lost her life under the Yuan Shen sword. Someone remembers what's the use, what's the use of visiting the underworld every year? It's dead, but it's just a scene to show to the world. Ayan laughed at herself, but it was a pity that in the bottom of her heart, she couldn't help but glance into the water mirror. At this look, his eyes were slightly condensed. The fairy standing under the peach tree turned his head and looked out of the water mirror. The white jade crown and the splendid appearance are not as shocking as the indifferent and silent pupils in his eyes. Extremely deep and seemingly shallow, and the world seems to have no thoughts in the prosperous world, the contradiction is too difficult for people to look directly at it. Obviously knowing that he was just looking at him casually, Ayan turned his head guilty as if he had been arrested. Ayan thought, do you really like it? If you really like it, how can you personally let her go to the ground? A voice full of doubt sounded on the Nahi bridge. Xiaoyan looked at her in surprise. Ayan. After Ayan realized that, she realized that she had actually asked what she said in her heart. She was quite surprised. Speaking of it, she was considered an old ghost who knew the world and saw the cold, and she did not expect that there would be sadness in the spring and autumn. Maybe she was envious of the female fairy and died, but there are still two people who are reciting her completely. A little lazy in my heart, Ayan jumped off the bridge, raised his hand to Xiaoyan, hurry up and give me menpo soup, I'm still on the road, don't delay my good days of prosperity and glory. Xiaoyan had been tossed so badly by her. With a wave of his hand, half a bowl of fragrant soup appeared in the green bowl on the table. He said in a bad mood, let's go, go clean. Ayan smiled and drank the soup. Xiaoyan shook his head, Ayan, everyone who reincarnated would be grateful for the reluctance of the deceased in this life, she was fine, not vague. After Ayan finished drinking, he was about to jump towards Wang Chuan. He suddenly remembered something, stopped his footsteps, and waited for a while before looking at Xiaoyan. Xiaoyan, you have been in Nehikiao for thousands of years, have you ever seen a fate that is worse than me? Xiaoyan Zheng'er 8 Classics shook his head, no, not even half of them. Then what's the reason for my fate? Is there a solution? Ayan Ba looked at him eagerly. Xiaoyan stretched out and shook them, there are two possibilities. One is that you have offended a terribly big man, or you have done a bad thing, God is punishing you. Ayan didn't bother to pay attention to him. The most remarkable person she had seen in the past few hundred years was Xiaoyan. How could she offend anyone? She snorted, what about the second one? Xiaoyan blinked at her and stretched his tone, the second one, you are the great man yourself. There is not an old saying in the world that the gods will be relegated to the people, and you must first suffer from it. Before he finished muttering, there was a bang, and Ayan had already jumped into the death hole under the Nahi bridge, and was nowhere to be seen. After Ayan disappeared, the hippie smile on Xiaoyan's face condensed, and he returned to his usual faint appearance, looking towards the end of Huangchuan Road slightly in a daze. He wanted to take advantage of today's cleanliness and take a good rest, but he still failed to fulfill his wish. A gust of breeze passed, but the strong celestial power surged on the bridge. Xiaoyan turned his head and saw the immortal gentleman who was still standing under the peach tree just now. Dazzling people's eyes appeared on the bridge without warning, and the person's indifferent eyes had slight fluctuations. Even if he knows the distinguished identity of the incoming person, Xiaoyan still has that lazy look, and he bows his hands at the young man, Shang Jun Pu Shang, don't come here unscathed. Pu Shang ignored Xiaoyan's greetings, only raised his eyes to look around Wang Chuan, and then looked towards Xiaoyan after a long while, with an indifferent expression, Xiaoyan Ghost Monarch, are you the one spying just now? Xiaoyan didn't even hesitate at all, and smiled back, Shang Jun, today on the night of Shang Yuan, I was so lonely on the Nahi bridge that I couldn't bear the loneliness, so I looked around and disturbed Shang Jun. It's true. Sin. Pu Yan still stared at him, his eyes burning, Di Jun has been alone. Xiaoyan nodded, spreading his palms towards the deserted bridgehead, of course, Shang Jun knew it at first glance. Pu Xiao looked at him for a long while, and finally, he glanced at the quiet Wang Chuan under the bridge, and turned back towards the ghost world without a word. He thought she was still alive, but in the end, it was still nothing. He personally sent her into the and ruined her soul. Even if she is still alive, she will never appear in front of him again for thousands of years. His catastrophe has never ended since 600 years ago. The white figure slowly disappeared at the end of Huangchuan Road. Zihuan looked at Wang Chuan, and began to miss Yin, who was a wayward, mean, rare and beautiful man. It's a reincarnation again, and I don't know how many years this stupid girl can go. Strangely enough, since this life, Yin's short-lived and premature fortune has finally turned around. At the 28th reincarnation, she became the daughter of a small merchant, inherited the family's workshop, and became the richest man in the south of the Yangtze River after untold hardships, and lived a full 60 years of life. In the 29th century, she was born in the frontier military family and joined the army to frighten the barbarians and became the best female general. In the 30th generation, he grew up in the scholarly family of Beijing, and praised all directions for piano, chess, calligraphy, and calligraphy. In the 31st generation, she was reborn in the royal family again. The prince was young. As the eldest daughter of the emperor, she was the eldest daughter of the country for 15 years, enjoying the power and wealth in the world. But after her death, she still remembers the past of every previous life. The Yin that Zihuan saw at Nahi Quoto was calmer and more awe-inspiring in his first life, and he also concealed the problem that he would have black abdomen and be careful eyes. Zihuan didn't expect that Yin, a weak and introverted female ghost who was inferior and inferior hundreds of years ago, could also be honed to her present level of elegance. But anyone who has gone through dozens of lives without forgetting her past, like her, will be like this. Such reincarnation is hardly a blessing or a curse. It was another 500 years, and Yin re-entered Huangchuan Road, and it was the ghost monarch who was still waiting for her to Zihuan. Girl, how fast, you have 1,000 years of reincarnation. On the bridge of Nahi, Zihuan teased her, you are a blessed one. Tisk tisk, let me see, this soul is more stable, those immortal monarchs are practicing in the immortal world. His soul is not as strong as yours. Cultivating immortals and cultivating demons is the strength of the soul, and Yin's miraculous reincarnation is really more reliable than cultivating immortals and demons in the upper realm. Yin turned his head, hid the cunning in his eyes, with a majestic appearance, with his hand held behind him, and his chin provoked to make a statement, Zihuan, I have figured it out. I don't ask for wealth and authority anymore. I just want to do ordinary things. I'm from the whole world. You didn't say that you were the most powerful ghost in the ghost world, but can there be a way to seal the memory of the 1,000-year reincarnation for me so that I won't remember it when I become a ghost again? Now that she speaks with her eyes open, she unconsciously brings a sense of calm and seductive superiority. Zihuan touched his chin, rather unbelief, do you really want to do this? Don't forget, although you don't remember the past when you are reincarnated in each life, but thousands of years of experience are imprinted in your soul, and you will be invisible. Every life is safe and wealthy, an adult. Once you cleanse all your memories, you will be reduced to an ordinary ghost. Your future reincarnation life will be ordinary and extraordinary. Back then, you didn't want to be a pretty man, do you want power and status? Don't stop, they are all vulgar things. Yin waved his hand again and again, but his eyes were rolling in the bottom of his heart. If you look at anything too much, you will get panicked, such as the Jinyanshan Emperor Qiao Lang in the world, and another example. Zihuan's face was astonished as a heavenly man at first, and turned into an inferior face for passers-by after hundreds of times. Of course, she only dared to think about it in her heart. After all, Zihuan was the only thigh she could hold in her endless life of reincarnation for thousands of years. She must be rarer. Well, based on our thousands of years of friendship, I will help you. Zaihuyan didn't know what Ayin was thinking, and after thinking about it for a long time, he stretched out his hand and scribbled in the air. At first, Ayin could yawn and watch leisurely, but then he couldn't calm down. With the gesture of Zaihuyan, the green mantra slowly appeared in the air, accompanied by clearer spells. The sleeping river under Wangchuan was awakened, and the sky's haking waves were set off. The entire Nahi bridge suddenly shook without warning. Even this shocking aura and vibration quickly spread outwards, but it spread to the entire underworld in half a breath. The strange and mysterious fiery red divine power suddenly rose up from the river and broke through the underworld and went straight into the sky. Ayin stared at the swaying stone bridge under his feet in amazement, then at the huge waves on the forgotten river, swallowed, and said dryly, "Zaihuyan, I just cast a baby, isn't the movement too big? Casting a fetus ruined the Nahi bridge in the ghost world. Will she be caught by the ghost king to skin and cramp, and fry it in a frying pan? Her ordinary life of peace and happiness has not yet been opened." Zaihuyan drew his ears and looked at Ayin, who was calm but roared in his heart, and picked his chin into the river, "Jump down, and make sure you get what you want." Although Ayin wanted to hurry up in the reincarnation, he still thought about his life, with a suspicious expression on his face. "You don't need to drink menpo soup. No need." Zaihuyan waved his hand, and the always lazy eyes had the meaning of excellence. "In the next life, Ayin, you will surely do as you wish. You will remember the suffering of the world in reincarnation, and never cease." Ayin was secretly happy, stepped on the bridge, and was about to be generous and greet the next life of ordinary vulgarity, but he was hung in the air and was called by Zaihuyan. "Ayin." Ayin turned his head. "You have gone through hundreds of generations and thousands of years of reincarnation, are there any special regrets?" Zaihuyan still looked lazy, and asked her playfully and carelessly. "What is particularly regrettable?" This is a prudent and thoughtful philosophical question of life, and she has to ponder it carefully. After all, for 1,000 years, there must be one or two things to be worthy of her bumpy and colorful road to reincarnation. Ayin blinked, thinking about the past, and somehow suddenly remembered the Pushang Shangjun she saw in the water mirror on the day of the spring festival 500 years ago. With a handsome face in white clothes, his eyes converged to the three realms. Behind him, the huge waves of Wangchuan flew, and the stone bridge under his feet vibrated endlessly, and the whole ghost world was in chaos. However, Ayin seemed to suddenly not hear all the sounds, turned around, and asked the person who had a glimpse 500 years ago, "Zaihuyan, I forgot to ask, the Pushang Lord 500 years ago, what is the name of the female fairy he fell in love with?" Zaihuyan was stunned, watching her for a while, and said, "Ayin." Ayin leaned a little closer, "What's your name?" "What?" But when Zaihuyan spoke, she was eager for knowledge, but one didn't pay attention, and tragically stepped on the air to the whirlpool behind Wangchuan. The young man sitting on the bridge was getting farther and farther, his face was a little helpless, and in the end he couldn't answer her question. Ayin thought, she will reincarnate again in the next life, and she will probably no longer remember that there was a ghost in the world who called to meditate, and stayed with her for more than 40 lives and watched the beauty of the world. Thousands of years have passed, and the dust will finally be turned away. Wanlai was quiet, and the Nahi bridge, which was still a little smoky just now, was quiet again. Only that road, that bridge, and that person remain unchanged for thousands of years. Attached ancient extra I don't know from which year, the hobby of running to the lower bounds of the ancient world to walk the bend is gone. When the gods in the ancient realm reminisced, the true of the ancients has leisurely admired the fall of the year in her star-picking pavilion. The stars are sinking. Yumi knew about this, and had a decent hobby of collecting treasures, so she would go to the ancient temple to touch some good things and move back to her mansion. The ancients were too lazy to care about her, opening his eyes and closing his eyes as if he hadn't seen it, until Uemi, the demon king of the world, hit Wahwaju with his idea. As the name implies, fig wine is made from the flowers and fruits of fig trees. This tree is arrogant and rare to serve. It bears fruit every 50,000 years, and the wine it produces will be drunk even if the true drinks too much. It is very rare, and it is really a treasure. Uemi had a good wine, and he went to the fig god's mansion for several years to ask for figs, but was dismissed bitterly by the fruit god who was sticking to the old crutch. It was not until the 10th year that she lifted the old fruit's cave. He used his walking stick to make a fire head, and the fig only started to complain with tears and snot. Oops, my of Uemi, the ancient true has been guarding every year and picking up his finesse. You have the ability to do not show off the power of the little god, you go to the ancient temple to make trouble. Don't say you can't keep it, little god, I'm at the door of my house, and there will be no dregs left in the next 10 years. So Uemi Shangshen, who snatched all the invincible hands of the god realm angrily, stepped into the ancient temple. She was a bold one, sneaking through the treasure chest and brewery of the temple, but she didn't even find a core. She was shocked by the guards of the temple, and was taken to the front of the ancients. Don't be ashamed of you, even if you steal something, if you steal it so honestly, forget it if you steal it so honestly, and you've been caught by the guards. The ancients held the teacup with a face of godly respect. Uemi rolled his eyes and said twice, if I mix up again, can I be better than you? The fig hasn't left a fig for 10 years, so you are embarrassed to say. The ancients narrowed their eyes slightly and understood. Do you want fig wine? Hundreds of thousands of years of friendship, how many pots do you have? Uemi sat in distress and began to make friendships. No. Antiquity refused without thinking, and began to push people. I have only made 10 pots in 10 years. Don't even think about it. You don't like wine, why do you want to come? Uemi is a monkey spirit, somehow he saw the ancients absent-mindedly, eyes in the Daowen forest, suddenly blessed to the soul, jumped to the ancients, where did you just look at? The ancient times raised a meaningful eyebrow, what do you think? Uemi took a breath and pointed at Tao Yuanlin's hand and began to tremble, isn't it what I thought? Baiju is a good wine, he likes no flowers the most, and everyone knows it. It's what you think. The ancient voice sounded just right. Uemi was a little dazed for a while, reacting to her intuition that she had accomplished this good thing. 10 years ago, she had her birthday, and she was kind for a while, and seeing that Baiju had been pitiful for tens of thousands of years, she took the antiquity to watch the scene. After seeing the antiquity, she left without leaving half a sentence. She thought that there was no play, and she was very sad for the spring and autumn period of Baiju for a few days. Uemi thought that she was a matchmaker at all times, but she was concealed and furious. You sit together on 2 weekdays and be polite, just like a guest, a good pair of role models, true gods, and the hiding is true. The antiquity gave the goddess who ransacked in Mangsing Chen pavilion to follow the hare, and pointed towards Daowen forest, what are you angry with, you know earlier than him. Uemi froze, turned her head in a daze, and couldn't believe it, he doesn't know. I don't know. Did you give away your wine? Sent it, every year. Is he stupid? Wuhua wine is a real treasure, because even if it is brewed by the power of the true God, it is difficult to save one, and it takes a lot of divine power. Oh, when I sent someone to deliver it, he said it was a gift from Xiang, but he didn't know it was made by me. Uemi was puzzled, and peeked at the ancient forehead, are you stupid? I've quietly liked it for 10 years and have done so much. Why don't you tell him? Antiquity shook his head, very serious, not enough. She looked in the direction of Daowen Lin. In the peach forest, the true in white was sitting against the tree, with black hair and beautiful face, and she was crowned with the 6 realms. Not enough. The ancient times repeated, turning his head, how can I dare to come to him and pay him 10,000 years and wait? Uemi glanced at Baiju and understood the meaning of the ancient sayings. Having been in love with such a person for tens of thousands of years, even if it is an extremely godlike world, once learned about it, he was at a loss and panic. I really like it. Maybe it's more than that. Yumi looked at the ancients and bent her eyebrows. It's really a pair of stunners, my little friend is sad. The Uemi didn't ask for the wine without flowers, but he smiled and squinted out of the ancient temple. Half a month later, a small turmoil broke out in the human world. Twilight, the Lord of the Heavens, reported the incident as a rule. The memorial was seen by Yumi, who was in charge of the Three Realms disaster. Constantly, Baiju is a true and should be inspected. Baiju ignored the mundane world for 30,000 years and ignored Uemi's savage entanglement. However, Uemi's folds floated into the temple 3 times a day like snowflakes, and the entire god realm looked at him, thinking that the 3 realms were in chaos and the mortal world fell. Baiju was so disturbed that she quietly searched for an early morning, and quietly left the bounds. Since the lower realm, with Baiju's temperament, would never go in vain, he turned into a mortal and walked eastward toward the capital, and he was also pleased to see the joy of the world along the way. Half a month later, I arrived in Chang'an, which coincided with the spring festival. There are lively days in the god realm, but he respects the true god and has a cold temper. No one dares to be presumptuous in front of him. These tens of thousands of years have been so dull and boring. Suddenly to the world, seeing the excitement of the world, could not help but shook his head and chuckled. It's no wonder that for hundreds of thousands of years of not returning home, it turned out to be fascinated by the world. After patrolling the world and watching the excitement, Baiju thought that he could leave, but before his words fell, the crowd in front of him was full of uproar and laughter, accompanied by overbearing voices that were too familiar to them. Treasurer, if you lose again today, these 10 altars of Daughter Red will all belong to me. Don't be fooling around, the people in Chang'an will all be watching. Baiju's calm and waveless eyes rippled, and she held her hands in front of her, with her clothes flapping up and down, cutting a path abruptly in the crowd, and walking to the front of the crowd. Lang Feng, a young man dressed in dress, with tall eyes, standing in front of a tavern with positive and negative hands, with an arrogant expression, is the ancient woman pretending to be a man. I'm used to seeing her robe with long sleeves, this kind of dress is rare. Baiju would never admit that just now, his dignified true almost came to a glorious light so that everyone could give way and let him look at the person he was thinking of. Since Uemi's birthday 10 years ago, when he returned to the ancient world, they had met occasionally, but they were all accompanied by other gods, and they had never been alone. Although it was full of voices at this time, it was the lower realm in the end. Inside the crowd was a small tavern, Qin Chu, with the banner book 100 Years Heirloom. The tavern occupies a small area, but the wine in the museum is intoxicating, especially the dusty daughter Hong in the 10 altars in front of the museum, and even Baiju can bear it. Couldn't help sniffing. He listened carefully to the words of the people around him, and he figured out the reason for the excitement here. The New Year's Day coincides with the century-old Qin Chu pub. The owner took out the Shitten Daughter Red uploaded by his ancestors and set up a Tendai arena. He said that the Central Plains restaurant can bring his own wine to fight, as long as he can compete with the daughter of the Qin Chu pub. One altar can be taken away between the uncles of Red. On the day when the arena was put out, Chang'an appeared as a young man who was dressed in jin, with the appearance of heaven and man. He brought wine every day. The wine he brought was eclectic and unheard of, but he was able to compete with these 10 altars of Daughter Red. However, in a few days, the fame of the young man in Jinyi spreads, and even heard it in the palace. This is the last day. The people of Chang'an have already been waiting for them. In the nearby Jiotai tea house, there are many powerful children, and the royal children are also here. Look at the excitement. Sure enough, when the hour came, a young man from Jinyi came here with wine. The nobleman in the tea house was unusual for ordinary people. Seeing this young man raised his hands and feet, there was the style of Wei and Jin's legacy. Wanting to make friends for 1 or 2, they sent people to inquire about Jinyi's youth life experience. In front of the Qin Chu tavern, The owner tried 9 days of good wine and was convinced by the boy. Although he heard the boy's wild words, he still said with a smile, "The son, but he has good wine, you might as well take it out. The Chin Chu pub has been around for 100 years. If you lose, you will be convinced." After speaking, he looked at the jar of wine in the hands of the young man in Jin clothing, and only stepped forward to uncover the altar. Baiju was also curious about him. Although he was mortal, the red wine of the 10 altars in Chin Chu pub did not lose the rare wine of the gods, and it was better than half of his cellar. Where did the ancients find so many good wines to compete with? Even if there were, after 9 days, it would be difficult for a rare wine to beat Chin Chu's daughter red. In Baiju's way of good wine, he said that there was no, and it really was gone. The young man in Jin clothing under the lights on the street looked at the wine altar in his hand, and it was a pity that he had a rare experience. For 5,000 years, he gave it to the people of this city. With a wave of her arm, the jar of wine was thrown into the sky, and the seal was opened. The whole jar of wine smashed in the air and settled firmly in the arms of the young man. She just walked like this, but for a moment, the jar of wine was full of fragrance. The street drew everyone into intoxication. After smelling the fragrance of the wine, seeing the people's expressions intoxicated, Baiju was taken aback, and it was actually fig wine. God realm figs are hard to find for thousands of years. These 10 years have been taken by Xiang to make wine and sent to his temple. How could they have them in the hands of the ancients? The shopkeeper, try it. My name, Wahua, may be more popular than your daughter. The ancients launched it by one hand and handed the fig wine to the owner of the Chin Chu pavilion with pride. The owner of the Chin Chu pavilion has no wine and is not happy. He was too greedy to move his feet by the fig wine. He was immediately overjoyed. He was about to take the wine. He suddenly remembered something and asked, "The old man has heard the past. What's the matter?" 10 years ago, the Zhao family in Guangxi, the Bai family in southern Shaanxi 9 years ago, the Hu family in Mobei 6 years ago, and the Lu family in Central Plains 3 years ago. Master. In the 10 years, the royal brewing family, including the Chin Chu Tavern, was kicked out of the restaurant, and it was considered old. It shouldn't be the boy in front of him, but it must have something to do with him. Upon hearing this, the surrounding people took a deep breath, seeing that the Jinyi youth was even more different, and they all guessed which clan in the dynasty still had this ability. The antiquity was taken aback, but he didn't expect several times of fighting in the lower bounds, revealing his deeds, and being remembered by others. Treasurer, today's wine fight is our business. What do you do with so many old things? The ancients waved impatiently and spilled a few drops of the wine. Can you still drink this flourless wine? Hey! Drink and drink! The owner of Chin Chu was just curious to ask. The wine spilled on the ground, he was distressed, and was busy picking it up. Little old man is waiting to taste it. Without waiting for him to pick it up, a hand stretched out from the side and took the wine jar steadily. The owner of the Chin Chu pavilion rushed for a moment, finally raised his head angrily, and was immediately stunned. The young man in white wears a tunic and robe nowadays, with ink pupils and phoenix eyes, handsome and unparalleled. He stood beside the Jinyi boy, picked up the wine jar with his slender hands, and looked towards the owner of the Chin Chu pub. My brother is young, he is not sensible yet, and the master heirs the treasure. There is no need to compare this game. We lost. After he finished speaking, he nodded towards the master of the Chin Chu pavilion, held the wine in one hand, and walked out of the ancient people who hadn't recovered. He has a dusty temperament, and wherever he walks, the people give way to avoid him. The owner of the Chin Chu pavilion watched this pair of brothers who had disappeared suddenly, and was both happy and regretful. Fortunately, the last heirloom could be saved. Unfortunately, the fig wine is so easy to smell that you can't taste it in your life. What a pity! In this way, Baiju disappeared into the bustling streets of Chang'an with an ancient posture, leaving behind the people looking across the street and admiring powerful children. When the ancients were taken away from the Chin Chu tavern, he didn't recover, and he was shocked after only 2 steps. She looked at her hand held with interest, wondering if these 2 stunners finally realized that the fig wine was made by herself. Do you understand what you want? Want to confess bravely? What would he say to himself when he turned his head? This is too sudden, how can I respond? Is the response reserved or bold? Today is so auspicious, or do you just tie it back to the upper ancient palace and get things done? The ancient true god, who had lived for more than 100,000 years, had just wandered around in such a time, and his thoughts had changed a lot. After walking halfway through Chang'an Avenue, until the hand he held in his palm became warmer and hotter, Bai Ju suddenly held the hand of another true god. Shi Shiran looked back, and in the anticipation of the ancients, he finally popped out the first sentence. Naughty, fig wine is brewed by the sun's supernatural power, you use it to fight with mortals. Mortals drink as little as 100 years of birthdays, and as many as they will fly to immortals. Life and death will bother you in chaos. Ghosts and immortals depend on life. What happened, after tens of thousands of years, how could he still return such a child's character? While he was talking, he rationalized the messy clothes for the ancients very naturally. Bai Ju has always been cold-tempered. Even if he commented on the ancients like this, his expression was gentle, but the blessing in his words and the intimacy of his actions were unconscious in the ancients, but now it is clear. Although there were no words as expected, the antiquity was full of joy. She pulled Bai Ju's sleeves and grabbed the dignity and wildness of the Lord of the world, which is rarely the tenderness of a young age. It's just to give these people more blessings. Since they have made good wine, they should have this blessing. If such a person who has wine skills died early, who would make wine for Bai Ju? In the ancient times, the door was very clear. If Bai Ju's yin and wrongness had not been hindered by Bai Ju's retribution, she would be happy to keep these mortals. Bai Ju knew that she was eclectic, and thought she was a young man, but she no longer reprimanded her. Where did you get the fig wine? Asked from Xiang. Antiquity had just been full of ambitions, and when he came to the head, he realized that Bai Ju hadn't seen his own mind, and immediately became a tortoise with a shrunken head. Good wine, I have nothing to do, begging for an altar of wine. If you want, just come to my temple to move. He brings an altar every year, and there are 4 or 5 altars left in the wine pavilion. Why should you ask him? In ancient times, he was a lazy person, and he didn't need to fight for a fight. It was obvious that something was wrong with the search for alcohol in the lower realms for 10 years. Could it be? He still knew Bai Ju's own hobbies, and he was shocked in his heart, followed by unbelievable ecstasy. Could it be that the ancients collected good wine for themselves? Just thinking about it, the mind that has not moved for thousands of years is like a wave of thousands of miles, and it is a bit at a loss. The ancients were afraid that Bai Ju would find the clues, and nodded repeatedly, trying to divert the topic. But Bai Ju somehow this time, suddenly her voice became a little heavy, and she asked to the end, "You don't like wine, how do you like to fight wine in the lower realm?" "I'm really afraid of something." The ancients took a long breath, just want to hide their minds, and said indiscriminately, "You guys are all good wines, I will win more and return to the gods, and I have the right to celebrate my birthday." "Are all good wines?" With just such a word Bai Ju's eyes darkened, the sweeping emotion was suppressed by life, and Mo Tong returned to tranquility. He didn't say a word for a while, until the ancient times felt something was wrong. He took a step back, his eyes calm and quiet. "So that's the case, then for this year's birthday, I will be waiting for your birthday gift." The 4 true gods of the ancient world, in addition to Bai Ju, Apocalypse is also good wine. I thought she was interested, but I was afraid that she was thinking too much. Bai Ju rolled up his sleeves, before she could laugh at herself, her hand was already grabbed. The immortal body has not been restored in the ancient times, and she is still dressed like a young man in Jinyi just now. She grasped Baiju's hand with a clear smile. It's a rare lower realm. Today is the world's upper yuan. It will not be too late for you to accompany me to understand the people's feelings in the world and return to the gods. She said that she dragged the youth around into the turbulent crowd. The youth was caught in his eyes by the smile, and her palms were tight, but she didn't let go anymore. 15 yuan, the world is reunited, these words are true from ancient times. In the ancient gods, Yuemi's mansion, Yuemi, who looked at the scene from the water mirror while eating melon seeds, shook his head, sighed and hated that iron can't make steel. The two pieces of wood, fortunately, I bothered to match them, and I still couldn't understand their minds, the combined ages of the two are older than the gods. I really don't know what they grew up eating. The goddess Xingyu sighed, and half a year passed in a blink of an eye, and in a blink of an eye it was the birthday of Baiju and Tiankai. Early in the ancient times, the gods in the palace ordered the gods in the hall to send the fine wines he had collected in the lower realm for 10 years to the Beiju hall, and the 9 bottles of the good daughter red who had won in the Qin Chu tavern were connected. The wine stove came out of the ancient temple, swaggered across the market, full of 3 carts, and blinded the eyes of the gods. The ancients thought, although it is not as good as Baiju's tens of thousands of years of secretly guarding and waiting, but after saving his wife for 10 years, it is always a little emboldened to promote marriage. Huan Huangzai embraced her husband's son-in-law. When Baiju heard the news, although she was surprised and delighted, she didn't dare to be sentimental last time, so she only pondered and ordered the guards. Apocalypse Hall accepts the gifts, visit the arrival report. Xiao Qian, the guard will report. Yesterday, at the time of yin, the back door of Tiankai Hall entered the 3-car wine furnace, and the gatekeeper said that they were all top grades. The guards came to report in anxiety, and did not dare to raise their eyes. The first part was silent, and at the end there was only a sigh. For the person he really likes, he has been used as a real cover. For some reason, in the 13,800th year of the ancient calendar, the true Baiju travelled in the lower realm on the day before his birthday. After that, he did not return for several years and no one knew his whereabouts. The ancient ambition of asking for a husband-in-law could not be achieved, so he sighed and sighed in Yuemi's mansion all day long. For some reason, Yumi has turned her eyes off her eyes recently. Hey, it's too difficult. Why is it so difficult to chase a husband-in-law? A man's heart is needled in the bottom of the sea, you say where he is going. La la, the ancients asked the same sentence every day. Yumi leaned on the corridor, looking to the northwest, and couldn't help muttering. I knew that your method was so unreliable, so I wouldn't follow you to learn anything about silent dedication. The iron rod was ground into needles, and 3 carts of good wine were given away. The spray didn't rise at all. After 10 years of hard work, he didn't even return to his birthday. The direction she looked towards was the Temple of Heavenly Revelation. The ancients were thinking of Baiju who was walking far away, but did not hear Yuemi's muttering, and only waited for Baiju to return to the gods to show that she was embracing the beauty in her heart. The two waited for several years in the star-reaching pavilion, but they never waited for Baiju and Tiankai to return. I don't know if it is destined in the dark. In that year, before the birthday of Apocalypse, he guarded the Qunkan pavilion alone, knowing that the chaos is coming, and since then, the lower realm has never returned. The ancients did not wait for Baiju to return first, but instead waited for the news that Apocalypse had set up a sacrifice formation in the lower realm to destroy the 3 realms. Sun and Apocalypse true god returned after hearing the news and discussed countermeasures. Since that day, the goddess of Yuemi Mansion has no more frivolous smiles at the corners of her mouth and her preference for robbing babies. The day before the ancients made up their minds to be martyred and save the 3 realms, Yuemi was drinking in the Star Harvest Pavilion. Yumi asked her, Baiju is back, why don't you say it? The antiquity remained silent for a long time, and finally said, I am the lord of the one realm, the true god of the 3 realms, and there are some things that must be done. If you want to lose it in the end, it is better to never know it. She suddenly turned her head and looked at Yumi beside her. There is something I wanted to ask you a few years ago. What's the matter? You don't like wine, why did you ask me for fig wine that year? Yumi was taken aback for a moment, and then went silent for a long time, and finally smiled. I can't imagine that the elm bumps will have a day of resuscitation. Don't guess, it's just what you think. The true god Apocalypse is good wine, this matter is also well known in the world. She turned and left, leaving the misty voice of the star and moon goddess on the long steps. Like you, I didn't find a good opportunity. After so many years, I just missed it. In ancient times, no matter what happens, protect him for me. The ancient times didn't understand the meaning of Yuemi's words. If you understood, there would be no regrets for tens of thousands of years later. She did not succeed in martyring on the second day, and the Yuemi took a group of gods to the lower realm and died in the apocalyptic formation of the world. The only one who saved his life and returned to the ancient gods was a small phoenix. At that time, she was not the queen of heaven Wuhuan, but a divine beast in the ancient world. The day when the news came, it was also a sunny day. The ancients held that jar of fig wine that was captured by Baiju many years ago, and looked at the mansion of the goddess Xingyu. Ling Ding was drunk and no one dared to persuade him. Later, is the beginning of all stories. The true was martyred in the ancient world, and the ancient world was sealed in dust. The true Baiju lived alone in the world and began a long wait for more than 60,000 years. More than 60,000 years later, when all the dust settled, Apocalypse got the dust-covered memory of the ancients for 300 years from the statue that had been weathered for tens of thousands of years in the realm of the sky. There will be a tear in the goddess statue of Wanyan. He always thought that Yumi left it to the ancients. There are many things he never knew. I didn't know it 60,000 years ago, and I didn't know it 60,000 years later. There was a saying in ancient times that was actually right. If you want to lose it in the end, it is better to never have it. This is not only the choice of the ancients and Baiju, but also Yumi's final choice and letting go. But after all, it's a shame. The ancients finally waited for that sentence, I am Baiju. But what about Yuemi? She spent 10 years carefully collecting the 3-car wine furnace, and it has been dusted in the wine pavilion of the Temple of Apocalypse. It has been more than 60,000 years without anyone coming to open it. The end of Ancient. Third chapter. The 8 wilderness of Kyushu, the 3 realms of the sky, the demon and the ghost, the human realm lives under it. Above the 3 realms, the ancient god realm is respected. More than 60,000 years ago, the tribulation of chaos came to the world, and the 4 great ancient gods, Antiquity, Baiju, Apocalypse, and Sunburst, greeted the robbery with all their strength, and then fell into a deep sleep, and the ancient world was covered in dust. 200 years ago, the 4 true gods awakened one after another, the ancient realm opened, and the 3 realms and 9 states of the fairy gods and demons returned to the ancient calendar of the Yuan dynasty. 100 years ago, the true Baiju was martyred by annihilating the chaos of chaos in the Yuanling swamp. At the time of the sorrow of the ancients, the true established the rule that non-god could not enter the ancient gods. After this catastrophe, the immortal demons' old grudges were put on hold, and the soldiers ceased. Feng Huang Fengran is the emperor of heaven, and he is in charge of the heavens. The king of the demon tiger clan is simply the demon emperor, and he is in charge of the demon world. The lord of the ghost world is personally selected by the ancient true gods, and takes over the ghost world after 100 generations, named Aoge. Since then, the 3 realms have been peaceful for 100 years. The 3 realms have not been born for a long time, and there are only 3 people in the 3 realms who hope to be the supreme god within 100 years. Heavenly Emperor Fengran, Demon Emperor Senjian, the third is not the Ghost King, but the Lord of Day's Mountain in the fairy world, Donghua Lao Shangjun. The detachment of Daisishan's status is evident from this. Of course, the two Donghualao Shangjun birthday banquets that ushered in the birth of the ancient true hundreds of years ago have also become legendary talks in the three realms. At this time, the back cliff of Days Mountain. Keng, keng. A dull crackling sound came from the back of the cliff, and half of the hill was faintly audible. They should have gotten used to it, and the beasts in the mountains were still playing with themselves, as if they had never heard of it. They directly filtered the noise. In the sheep intestine path leading to the back cliff, a white and tender path boy stumbled over. He was half old, with red lips and white teeth, and an indigo robe, holding a wooden barrel half his body taller, and moving the path. It took a full hour for the little Dao Tong to stop on the edge of the back mountain cliff. He put down the barrel and looked down the cliff. The back cliff of Days Mountain is a valley with no bottom, with white clouds lingering all the year round, faintly visible green pines and green grass, gurgling valleys and blooming flowers. The fairy scenery of Days Mountain seems to be gathered here. Unfortunately, no matter how good the place is, few people have entered for hundreds of thousands of years. For no other reason, the old man of Donghua started to stand on the mountain gate, and he shouted that he was a kind-hearted and compassionate apprentice, and he chose the place where the mountain gate was confined without blinking. The seal is hidden above the white clouds at the bottom of the valley. As long as the old man throws it into the back valley, the disciples of Days Mountain will not be able to step out a step before the hour has arrived. No matter how tall the mountains are, no matter how clear the water is, no matter how beautiful the scenery is, no matter how beautiful the flowers are. Xiao Dao Tong opened his eyes wide and looked at the figure of Tanaka chopping firewood, hurriedly tidied up the pleated robe, cleared his throat, and screamed, "Little master, little master, little master uncle!" The crisp sound reverberated in the mountains, and then floated to the bottom of the valley. The figure at the bottom of the valley calmly chopped the firewood for a while, then leisurely flew towards the edge of the cliff by the clouds. The cloud is not yet close to the edge of the cliff, and the golden lotus seal quietly emerges above the clouds. A few minutes closer to the cloud, a huge fiery red wing appeared abruptly in midair, and it slapped the person on the cloud with the blazing fire. No matter how the person on Ren Yunduo hides, he can't avoid the fire wing's persistent pursuit. The person had no choice but to give up and stand in midair. The whole person was fanned by the fire wing and turned several times, and was burned to a black spot in the blink of an eye. Charcoal. Seeing that the man had suffered, two big round eyes, a phoenix mouth, and a big mouth appeared on the wings of the fire, pointing to the black coal figure, and arrogantly chuckled twice, then twisted his fat wings and dissipated. Midair. The golden lotus in the sky saw that the people on the clouds had suffered, and looked at each other spiritually, quietly dissipating the thunder, and drifting to the side quietly. The edge of the cliff calmed down. Xiao Dao Tong lowered his head, took a few glances at the place where the fire wings had disappeared, and then glanced at the gentle golden lotus on the edge of the cliff, feeling vigorously in his heart. It is worthy of the handwriting of the emperor. Compared with the lotus left by the master, the mighty and domineering is really not a level. The fiery red phoenix wings that were majestic just now were the seals that the Emperor Fengran personally put down in those years. As for the object of punishment, it is naturally the black charcoal on the cloud that has been burnt in embarrassment. Hey, the little uncle's love for Zy Yulu is a bit too persistent. He knows that he will be bullied by this fire wing every time, but he sees death as if he is coming back. At this time, He Tanzi vigorously shook his body a few times, read a fairy formula to draw out a dark cloud, and happily washed his whole body again, until the whole person could see something human. Then the cloud floated towards the edge of the cliff again. Xiadao Tong flew over. Tsing Yi, get it! He Tanzi floated cross-legged in the air, touching the lotus seal on the edge of the clouds with his hand, and said lazily to Xiadao Tong. The voice sounded clear, a bit lively in publicity, and it was estimated that it should be a half-year-old. Hey, Uncle Kuching, you go on. Xiadao Tong quickly responded, struggling to pick up the Hey Person High wooden barrel and sway towards Hai Tanzi. The aroma of wine overflowed from the wooden barrel, and 1 or 2 drops suddenly fell on the ground. The person on the cloud immediately sat upright, with his burnt eyebrows twisted into a ball, and felt distressed. Xing Yi, be careful, your master is very rare for his drunken jade dew. I have waited half a year to get this point, you don't waste it to master uncle. When the words came to her ears, Xing Yi looked at the half-high wine barrel in her arms, crying without tears. The drunk jade dew in the fairy pool under the mountain only got 1 pool in half a year, and every time at least half of the pool's collection was sent to the back valley by the master's orders. The whole day's mountain up and down did not have the richness of this little teacher. No one in the mountain gate knew that Shizu and Shifu regarded the little uncle of Kuching as eyeballs, and he was ashamed to say, "That's it." Xing Yi is the disciple of Xian Shan Zian Jun, the first disciple of Donghua Lao Shang Jun. After Lao Shang Jun retreats, Dais Shan is handed over to Xian Shan Zian Jun. Xing Yi naturally wanted to argue for master. He immediately put the wine barrel in Kuching's hand, wrinkling his face and said aggrieved, "Little master, master loves you the most. He said that the valley is deserted and quietly asked me to add it to you. A pot." Xing Yi took out a white fairy pot from his arms and handed it to Kuching. Kuching saw the eyes of the little fairy boy sticking to the porcelain pot, he groaned a little, and waved his hand quite tragically. "Xing Yi, this pot of drunk jade dew is given to you. You come to see me every month. Thank you." Xing Yi grinned suddenly, his eyes narrowed into a gap, and he withdrew his hands in a thunderous manner, but said in his mouth, "Little master, how dare Xing Yi? Take it, and then go back after drinking. Those little guys are all ghosts and spirits, you must not be able to hide." Kuching said he was about to drive back to the valley, but was called by Xing Yi. "Little master." Kuching turned around. Xing Yi poked her finger and asked, "Little master, when can you go out of the valley?" Xing Yi entered Day's Mountain for only 1 year, but Kuching has been imprisoned in the back valley for 5 years. He gave away a year of drunk jade dew, and he had never heard of the reason why Kuching was imprisoned in the forbidden area. He only knew that this cherished and important young teacher in the mountain gate was the only master in the 60,000-year history of Day's Mountain. He placed 2 seals for the disciples here. Kuching rubbed his chin and asked, "Master is out?" Xing Yi shook his head. Kuching smacked his lips, thrust his waist in the air and called out, "Hey, Fatwing, I forgot the imperial decree of the emperor, come out and tell me again." After speaking, he held the barrel and floated the clouds towards the bottom of the valley. Away! Xing Yi eagerly watched Kuching drive down the valley without looking back. The dissipated blazing divine power recondensed into fiery red wings and emerged in the air. The wings called Fat Wings by Kuching turned into eyes and beaks, transforming into the appearance of a small fire phoenix. "Hey, how many times have I said it, my name is Hwaki. You are the Fat Wing, and your whole family is Fat Wing." It twisted its fat waist and looked down with full of air. Until the golden lotus flower gathered around it, Xing Yi looked at it with wide eager eyes. It hummed with satisfaction, cleared its throat, raised its head and screamed at the fading back figure at the bottom of the valley. The domineering phoenix roared on the back cliff. Many fairy beasts in the forest leisurely raised their feet and walked to the edge of the forest. They stretched out their paws to cover their mouths and yawned. They were obviously very familiar with this scene. "According to my decree, the immortal monarch has made a stubborn mistake in Kuching and caused great disasters. From now on, he will ban his foot in the back valley of Day's Mountain. It was when you went down to Day's Mountain." Huo Wing continued to read this sentence 3 times with great strength and then satisfactorily stopped. It raised its chin towards the dumbfounded Xing Yi, and disappeared into the air again. "Is this a seal?" "Yes, this is a seal, but a refined seal." Sure enough, he couldn't enter the world of immortals at the level of the Emperor of Heaven. After a long while, Xing Yi put her hand back on her small chin, silently comforted her frightened little mind, blinked towards the bottom of the valley, and quickly turned towards the top of the mountain after recovering. Oh my god, he has to go back and ask, what did the little uncle of Kuching have committed, and he was tossed like this by the Emperor of Heaven. I heard that Shizu hasn't passed the pass for more than 10 years. As for becoming a god, even a demigod in the three realms hasn't been seen for more than 100 years, let alone a god. If the fortunes of the young master in Kuching are bad, and the master retreats for thousands of years, I am afraid that this handsome young master will become a trembling old man when he is out of the valley. Xing Yi carried the immortal bottle just gifted by Kuching and ran happily, but didn't realize it at all. She was leading the salary of sweeping the mountain gate, but she was trying to save the three realms. At the bottom of the valley, here is like spring all year round, with 100 flowers blooming. The prosperous green pine surrounds the valley, and a wooden bridge spans across the creek. One end is connected to a flower garden, and the other end is a bamboo workshop. Outside the bamboo workshop, a fence was erected with soil, and there were 2 rare sycamore trees growing inside. The golden sycamore leaves fell outside the bamboo workshop, and they stepped on them, making them extremely comfortable. In a word, this valley simply gathered the spirit of Day's Mountain 9 out of 10. It's a pity that the 2 seals at the top of the valley have turned this fairyland blessed land into a well-known living hell. The fairy cloud slowly descended from the cliff. The people on the cloud gingerly carried the drunk jade into the bamboo workshop, turned around and took off the scorched clothes, and drove around in the small lake, waiting to be washed clean, white and tender. Nan, he just crawled out of the lake. He squeezed a fairy tactic and turned into a Xing Yi. The young man put on his body, and looked into the stream for a long while before raising his head in satisfaction. At this time, the immortal monarch who was called Kuching by Xing Yi, the rarest treasure and the most suffering disciple of Day's Mountain in 60,000 years, was considered full of his original appearance. Chapter 5 The darkness was broken, the light suddenly appeared, and the vigorous bottom of the valley was slightly imprinted in the eyes. Blue sky and white clouds, green mountains and green waters. Hundreds of flowers are in full bloom, and streams are gurgling. Everything is colorful and clear in your ears. This scene was the first sight of the world, and it couldn't be more perfect. The golden sycamore leaves were warm and sweet, and the little beast on the sycamore branches rolled over comfortably, half opening his eyes to look at the novel world. It yawned lazily, apparently satisfied with the place of awakening. A white cloud fluttered down from the sky, and a black shadow on it jumped straight into the stream not far away, splashing the lake. After a while, a naked teenager popped out of it. The little beast violently covered his eyes with his paws, but unconsciously let out a slit. Maybe he saw something extraordinary, and the little beast grinned secretly. Seeing the boy put on a robe and came over with a wooden barrel, the little beast kicked his legs, opened his belly, stretched out his paws and began to pretend to sleep. It doesn't do anything else, but as a species that has slept for 100 years, pretending to be asleep is completely self-explanatory, and it is quite impressive. After Kuching hid the drunken jade dew in the bamboo workshop, he flew to the plane tree to look for his baby Bumps. When he saw the water-squishy beast, he slept sweetly with a humble face. He didn't alarm it, smiled and carefully hugged this grinning thing. The little beast opened his eyes and caught a glimpse of the gentle smile in the young man's eyes. In a daze, he quietly put away the sharp claws under the mat. Today, although Xing Yi said that it was childish, it evoked a past in Kuching's heart, which made him feel sad. He sighed 3 times at a time, and even cancelled his daily walks, poured a pot of drunk jade dew and sat in the yard in a daze with the water-condensed beast. It has only been a few years since Xing Yi entered the mountain gate. He has never seen Huashu, or he would not like the eldest daughter of Shuilin Xianjun's family. Kuching muttered quietly while drunk Yulu, and did not forget to pat his arms. Little beast, little guy, liking is a lifetime thing. If you give up easily, you don't really like it, don't you think? The little beast's claws seemed to flop unconsciously, hooked the Taoist robe on Kuching, and rubbed it in his arms. Hey, you don't know what happened back then. I asked you what's the use? Kuching leaned back and looked straight at the moon in the sky. He sighed, the day I met Huashu, the moon was also it's so big. The childishness of the young man under his eyes gradually faded, and a touch of melancholy that did not belong to him appeared, and even a faint self-blame and regret appeared. Obviously Kuching hasn't grown up enough to hold back some of the mistakes of his youth in his heart for a lifetime, and Tsing Yi's words have opened a gap in his heart like a sharp axe. For the first time, he restrained the laughter on his face, holding the ignorant water-condensed beast, and began to recall the day that changed his life on Wutong Island 5 years ago. In the more than 100 years after the true Baiju fell, one of the rarest incidents in the 3 realms and 8 desolations was the birth of the second fire phoenix from the Phoenix clan on Wutong Island. Everyone knows that the emperor of the Phoenix clan comes from the Fire and Phoenix family, but since ancient times, each fire phoenix has only inherited one, which is extremely rare. Then the second fire phoenix came into the world to become the top priority of the Feng clan, and the Emperor Feng Ran even organized a banquet for him to know the 3 realms. On Wutong Feng Island, the new fire phoenix descends, and we invite all the gods to celebrate with me. This domineering congratulatory sticker, written by the emperor himself, is still being talked about by immortals. There are even more rumors that the ancient True who has been hidden for a long time also set foot on Wutong Island on the day that the little fire phoenix was born. Before he was born, he provokes the attention of the 3 realms, and I am afraid that the sudden appearance of the little of Qingqi Palace Yuankai in the past could not match the scenery of this little phoenix. A few years ago, the emperor asked Ling Wan, who was in charge of the destiny, to test the fate of the little fire and phoenix. Ling Wan did not say much, but left the 4 weird words I am confused and patted his away. After this incident, the elders of the Feng clan panicked and poured spiritual power into the egg every day to protect the little phoenix's spirit. Even the Emperor of Heaven spent half of his time on Wutong Island to take care of it. 100 years later, this egg that the 3 realms has been paying attention to has finally reached the day of breaking its shell smoothly. The Emperor was overjoyed and invited all the immortals to gather on Wutong Island to celebrate the birth of the second fire phoenix in the history of the Feng clan. The banquet was extremely sensational, and the Emperor of Heaven ordered the phoenix of the clan to go to all corners of the country to greet the guests. The day before Xia Huo Feng's nirvana, guests from the 3 circles on Wutong Island gathered together to celebrate the island. At that time, Kuching was sealed by the apocalypse and threw it to Day's mountain to practice for 100 years. The days in the mountains were boring, and when he first heard about it, he happily told old master Dong Hua that he was going to Wutong Island to plant a stick to congratulate him. Dong Hualin was about to become such a precious and noble apprentice when he was about to become a god. He was so rare that he sent a group of disciples and grandchildren to follow Kuching. Kuching has a very young age in Day's Mountain, and it is indeed a spectacular thing for a dozen or so grey-haired immortals to follow him respectfully and respect his uncle. Kuching grew up in Qingqi Palace. With the spirit of Tiankai and Fen Ground protecting the calf, the things he used to play children are rarer and harder to find than those of the Tiangong royal family. Entering Day's Mountain, Lao Shangjun baby him, he has been used to it for 100 years. The immortals in the mountain gate are pure, the Kuching temperament is pleasing, and they are the treasures of the old Shangjun. It will not take long for the whole mountain gate to become the treasure of the whole mountain gate. As the saying goes, the heart is relaxed and the body is fat. The birth of Kuching is an anomaly. Although he is only 100 years old, he has experienced the strange growth process of his mother denies, father is dead, aunt is emperor, and uncle is a monster. After 100 years of comfortably raised in Daishan, he naturally became a fat fairy. The old man of Donghua lived for more than 60,000 years, and he was born in ancient times. On the 30th birthday of Donghua, the 10th Emperor Twilight sent 4 snow horses from the West China Sea in a carriage made of turquoise stone. Back then, this Suiwengxian car made a sensation, and envied all the immortals and cited it as a century-old story. However, Shangjun Donghua is indifferent and rarely goes out. These snow horses came from Day's mountain and were put in the back mountains by the old Shang Jun. Therefore, the fairy demon of the three realms has always heard about this precious gift. Its name, but never saw the true face of the fairy car. This time it took 3 days to travel thousands of miles. The Whitebeard nephews are very old and refined. For fear that they will be tired from the delicate little uncle, and secondly, they want to please the master, so on the day they went out, they found out the snow horses that had been raised in the back mountains for tens of thousands of years. Then he wiped the dusty car shaft in the treasure pavilion to a bright light, and then took their little teacher, Uncle Le, on the road. Such a swagger all the way. Within a day, the three realms immortal demon knew that the old Donghua Shangjun of Day's mountain had newly accepted a treasured apprentice, and even the Sui-Wengxian car was used for him. It's a pity that although this little apprentice had a good background, he was a second-generation ancestor with a third-rate immortal force, and he couldn't get on the stage. The old man of Donghua is very popular. As soon as this is said, the fairy is unhappy. Why shouldn't he doubt the eyes of the old man? After living for 60,000 years, how could Shangjun Donghua, who is about to become a god, accept a sacred apprentice who only knows how to confuse his life, but he still regards his eyes as painful? This is too unreasonable. But this is absolutely true. All the immortals who flew all the way to see the scene of the youngsters traveling in Day's mountain patted their chests to ensure that the words were true. What is the evidence? Look, the dozens of nephews with white beards spinning behind his are proof. With tyrannical strength, where would you need the protection of juniors? With a pure character, how could he instruct the elderly to work hard? The three realms respect their strength and are used to look down on the prestige of the newborn calf. Therefore, the immortal demon who received the news from Kuching hadn't even entered the island, secretly feeling that old Master Donghua's light and simple reputation for a lifetime would be destroyed by this disciple who didn't know where he came from. The gossip that was secretly spoken would naturally not reach Gu Xiaopeng, who was fathy-hearted and fat. He slept all the way, lying in the Sui-Wengxian car swaggering, and being pointed to Wutong Island. The conscience of heaven and earth, this is really not Gu Xiaopeng's fault. He rolled down from the ancient realm, and in the ancient realm, the lowest row of shafts has also become a divine beast of the gods. If he knew that a Sui-Wengxian car would ruin his reputation for half of his life, it would affect Hua Shu's opinion of him. He would even climb to Wutong Island by himself. In the three realms, there are three people in the lower realm of Kuching, Tiankai, Fengran, and Donghua. In their opinion, it is normal for Kuching not to say that it is driving a snow-wheeled immortal car, it is normal to step on the blue dragon and black tortoise, so they did not take this matter to heart. However, Feng Ran was in favor of Tiankai's ideas of raising children and frustrating education, and wanted to kill this kid's prestige, so he set his resting place in Zhuhua Pavilion. Zhuhua Pavilion is located on the back island of Wutong. I heard that Kuching, who was ordered by his master to come to congratulate him, was thrown at the Zhuhua Pavilion by the emperor. It is obvious whether the disciples also dislike it. For a time, half of the immortal monarchs who came for the little fire phoenix inadvertently gathered in the Zhuhua Pavilion. It's a mule or a horse, and you have to pull it out and let them see the truth. The things in the world are also mysterious. Many years later, it was also said that if the Emperor of Heaven had not kicked the immortal monarch of Kuching from Day's mountain to the Zhuhua Pavilion, they were afraid that the three realms would not have so many magnificent scenes for thousands of years. But there are certain things that are destined to be impossible to avoid and cannot escape. Consummation, success, or failure, is nothing more than a lifetime. Chapter 6. As the saying goes, there are talented people from generation to generation, and new generations replace old ones. Heroes are like this, and this is especially true for beauties. Where there are people, there are rivers and lakes, and immortals are no exception. Female immortals are like crucian carp who cross the river. At that time, Jing Zhao, the most precious and beautiful girl of the heavenly emperor Twilight in the three realms, had long since disappeared. Hundreds of years later, this fame fell on the Princess Hwashu of the Peacock family on Baniao Island in Bahai. Hwashu is only over 1,000 years old and is the young girl of the Peacock King Hwamo. Her birth is quite legendary. On the night she was born, colorful auspicious clouds enveloped the Bahai. The sharks, who had been hard to find for thousands of years, went ashore and sang music. There were even sea beasts cheering on the moon at the end of the North Sea. One night later, Hwashu came to the world, the auspicious clouds scattered, the sharks returned, and the sea beasts died. This spectacle was witnessed by many immortals, and when they were amazed, everyone also said that the little princess was lucky to invite the sky, and it was afraid that it would be expensive in the future. The bird clan regards the peacock as the king, but respects the phoenix as the emperor. The Feng clan is Loki. For tens of thousands of years, they have only worked for two things. But these two things alone are so big that the three realms have focused their attention and celebrated together. The momentum of the Peacock clan has dimmed a lot since the Phoenix Emperor was reborn. Hwamo knew that it was harder to compare to the dignity of the Phoenix Emperor sitting on the throne of the Emperor. It is rare that there is a fascinating girl who is entrusted with auspicious clouds and is naturally pampered as a treasure. Hwashu's status in the Peacock clan is a bit more noble than her two brothers. This daughter is also fighting for the Peacock King. When she was born, the fairy power in her body was far better than the ordinary fairy clan, and she was promoted to the throne at the age of 800. At the age of 900, she participated in the Tiangong Flat Peach Party. The beauty of her appearance attracted the attention of the immortals, and some people even said that she would not lose the goddess's daughter Jing Zhao in the future. More than 100 years after Jing Zhao disappeared, Hwashu's beautiful reputation has long been unique. As she grows older and reaches the age of Su marriage, there are countless immortals on Baniao Dao who have proposed marriage. The Peacock King was so relieved that he wanted to find a good man for the young girl, but Hwashu refused to accept it. Having been so nagging for hundreds of years, the Peacock King was so tired that she had to follow Hwashu's wishes and let her choose the one that went well. It's a dragon or a snake, as long as she agrees, it doesn't matter. The Peacock King has chosen hundreds of choices of husband and wife, and it is difficult for Hwashu to get into Hwashu's eyes, and she does not know what kind of graceful immortal she wants to choose. With emotion, the rising star in the fairy world was afraid of losing her share, so she didn't dare to go to Baniao Island to ask for a kiss, but she only dared to admire her in her heart. Hwashu is obsessed with cultivating on weekdays, and rarely appears in front of others. Although her reputation is great, not many people have seen her appearance. This time, she accompanied her father to congratulate her, and many fairy monarchs were on Wutong Island to meet this legendary Princess Peacock who is the most beautiful in the three realms. Unexpectedly, as soon as Hwashu entered the island, he asked the elders of the Feng clan to set her resting place in Liuyun Pavilion. Liuyun Pavilion is deep into the island, secluded and difficult to enter, and not far from the ancestral tree of the Phoenix, which would destroy the nirvana of the Phoenix. Very few guests on the island come near here, so there is no fairy king. Seeing Hwashu before the banquet, such an inaccessible situation caused many male immortals to lose. Every story in a folk drama book likes to pay attention to the ups and downs. It will not be so plainly to pull the curtain down. There will always be a hatred cannon fodder for everyone to pass the time to vent their grievances. At this critical time, Gu Xiaopeng was born. He lay on the Suiwangxian car of the old man of Donghua, swept across the island and lived in the Zhuhua Pavilion. Except for Gu Xiaopeng, everyone knew that within 100 meters of Liuyun Pavilion, there was only one Zhuhua Pavilion. And the two pavilions are hidden between the lush sycamore trees. There is only one guest in the island from Kuching that Feng Gran arranged. She ordered this early in the morning. Although the Feng Huang elder was surprised that Feng Huang would personally ask a disciple of Days Shan where he was staying, he still set up Zhuhua Pavilion according to Feng Gran's intention. It was vacant, but no one expected that Hwashu would choose the Liuyun Pavilion just aside to relax. Feng Ran kicked Kuching to a good place where everyone envied and everyone was jealous. Stupid people have stupid blessings, which means that Gu Xiaopeng is a strong baby who can survive a thunderstorm. Therefore, when Kuching slept in the dark in the Zhuhua Pavilion, the guests who did not know that the entire Wutong Island had 3 equally important thoughts in one day: to see the birth of the second small fire phoenix in the line of the fire phoenix throughout the ages. Look at the beautiful and incomprehensible Princess Huashu of the Peacock family with auspicious clouds, and then, look at the virtue of the young man of Donghua who did not know where it came from. It has been half a day since Kuching entered Wutong Island. They have not taken the initiative to go to the Wutong Temple to meet the elders of the Phoenix tribe, nor have they seen the gates that are familiar with Day's Mountain. The apprentice really doesn't know the style. Among the dozens of nephews with white beard, headed by Xian Shan Immortal Sovereign Tu King Yun, he is not young, and his network is naturally not narrow. Rumors from Wutong Island spread to him sooner or later. After hesitating for a moment, for the sake of Daisishan's tens of thousands of years of fame, he took a long breath and pushed aside the sleeping room in Kuching as if he were dead. Seeing him go in, the faces of the other white-beard fairies were full of respect, who didn't know that the little uncle's anger was not ordinary enough to get up. So after a stick of incense, when they saw the scene where the robes were torn into strips of King Yun jumping out of the window, they only blinked calmly and disappeared. Kuching didn't wake up until after the dusk of the willow head on the moon. Seeing that he had arrived at Wutong Island, he was overjoyed. After eating the snacks prepared by his nephews, he swaggered out to have fun. These actions were completed in one go, so fast King Yun had no time to euphemistically tell him the discussion of the immortals on the island. Hey, Master Uncle Kuching won't be affected. The nephews who were still in Zhuhua Pavilion in Kuching guarded the door and looked at the fat shadow in Kuching and started discussing. I knew that in the past few years, I should prepare more vegetarian dishes for the uncle. When the uncle was thin, he looked very handsome. Now these young immortals don't care about the character, but only care about the appearance of the skin. It's not old enough to be laid down. If it doesn't work, I'll still follow Master Uncle Kuching. His practice time is short, so he won't be bullied by others. The immortals of Day's Mountain have inherited the honesty of Donghua Lao Shangjun. It is often difficult to find a mountain for hundreds of years. They are all old-fashioned people who like to squat in the nests of the mountains. They look at Kuching, it's good to look at everything, look wherever they are handsome. They don't like that the immortal by the side criticizes the cute and innocent little teacher, and gives pointers. Qinghai was about to follow along while talking about it, but was held back by King Yun. Don't worry. King Yun touched his beard, smiled and squinted. You don't know the nature of our uncle master? There is no way to lose. Qinghai remembered the drunk jade dew that disappeared unknowingly at the bottom of his mountain every year, and nodded sadly and moved his feet back. Zhuhua Pavilion and Liuyun Pavilion are located deep in the inner island of Wutong, and other guests live on the outer island, separated by a naturally formed lake in the middle. There is a stone bridge on the lake, and there is a stone pavilion in the middle of the stone bridge. I don't know if it's an appointment. In the past 2 days, many immortals gather here to admire the moon in the evening in the stone pavilion, and they are also young immortals. The handsome and energetic male fairy wanted to get the moon first when he approached the water tower, and waited for a chance to meet Huashu at the place where Liuyun Pavilion exited the inner island. As for the female fairies, they are not willing to admit defeat in their hearts, and they are secretly interested in comparison, so they naturally come here with them. The small stone pavilion, a square inch of land, contains all the palm beads of the fairy world. In the stone pavilion, the male fairies chatted on one side, while the female fairies talked and laughed on the other side, but the topic was always inseparable from the well-known Huashu. Jinyun, I heard that my uncle and Shangjun Laming exchanged gang tie a few days ago. You girl, the marriage is fixed, and you don't see you tell us. Mu Hua Shangjun's eldest daughter, Mu Rong, was married a few years ago. The second prince of the East China Sea, the person she asked was Jinyun, the third princess of the South China Sea, her husband's cousin. Jinyun, your father really loves you, and the husband-in-law chosen for you is really good. As soon as this remark came out, the female fairies in the stone pavilion exclaimed. There are only dozens of lords in the fairy world, and the thundering prince is in the position of thunderstorm. He has a high status in the palace and is highly regarded by the emperor. It is rumored that Lei Han, Lei Ming's son, shows talent and good-natured character, and is also a good son-in-law candidate. With Lei's family and the three princesses of the South China Sea, this marriage can be regarded as a match made in heaven. Second cousin, my father meant to wait until it's settled down. I didn't hide it. The third princess Jinyun was tender and shy. At first hearing this, her face suddenly burned, but she saw the envy on the faces of the female fairies. Couldn't hide the smile in his eyes, and the corners of his eyebrows curled up. When the immortals had other topics, they naturally joked about the three princesses of Jinyun. Seeing the immortals shift their focus, Mu Rong smiled at the corner of her mouth. Jinyun caught a glimpse of the look on her face and sighed in his heart. In the days when I entered the fairy prince who proposed to Huashu on Baniao Island, there was a second cousin, Ao Tian. Although her sister-in-law looked open-minded these years, she least liked others to mention the princess of the Peacock clan in front of her. There were bursts of laughter and shitting, and they were happy. In the clouds above the stone pavilion, a delicate and cute little red phoenix was squinting at the excitement. After listening to it for a while, it yawned, opened its mouth, and muttered boredly, "What a great promise, what's the equivalent of marrying a husband-in-law? Feng Yin, what do you think they should be compared to?" A figure suddenly appeared beside the cloud. The visitor was dressed in a red ancient robe, and his long fiery red hair was scattered on his shoulders without an imperial crown. She snapped her fingers and turned into a wooden chair carved in midair. She lazily sat on it and raised one leg. "Let's talk. If I'm satisfied with what you say, I will be spared the punishment you ran out today. If you are not satisfied..." She raised her eyebrows at little Huofeng, and said with a smile, "I will definitely let you know why the flowers are so red and why the moon is so round." Chapter 7 There have been two emperors in the 60,000 year history of the heavens, one is the dragon Twilight, and the other is the Phoenix Emperor and Phoenix Dai. Twilight is a true who spent thousands of years honed out of the ancients, kind and tolerant, and respected by all immortals. Feng Ran is born with a natural nurturing, and her temperament is completely different. No one expected that before Twilight incarnate Zhilong guarding the fairy demon enchantment, he would hand over the position of the Emperor of Heaven to Feng Gran. If Feng Ran is the Emperor of the demon clan, he might be more in line with the taste of the demon. 100 years ago, the immortal demon battle, the blood feud between the two clans was forged, and countless casualties. Under such circumstances, it is not a blessing to win the position of the Emperor of Heaven. Even if Feng Ran is already the Emperor of Phoenix, the immortals may not mean to read a joke to keep silent on her taking the throne of the Emperor. 100 years later, the result was beyond the expectations of the three realms. The arrogant Feng Huang sat on the seat of the Emperor of Heaven as stable as Mount Tai, like a fish in water. There is no other reason. At the beginning of his ascension, the immortal clan was depressed, and Feng Ran lifted all the restrictions on the 9 great spiritual springs in the South China Sea, where Wutong Island had been controlled for tens of thousands of years, for the immortals to practice. The Feng clan is handed down from the ancient times, when the ancient realm was covered in dust and lived in the lower realm. Now that 60,000 years have passed, the Feng family has become accustomed to life in the lower realm and settled on Wutong Island. In ancient times, there were only welcome reasons. For 60,000 years, they have taken up half of the heaven and blessed land in the fairy world. Twilight did not dare to force the Feng clan to spit out a little bit of treasure when the Emperor Feng was asleep. This time the elders of the Feng clan were so generous, all because of Feng Guang's affection. Eating short hands and soft hands is an immutable truth. Feng Ran has grown the world of immortals metamorphically in just 100 years in a way of rogues and plugins, leaving all the lively immortals speechless. She is still the arrogant and bad-tempered Fen Gran, but 100 years later, she has also become the undisputed emperor of the fairy clan. Not everyone can pour out the baby in their hands to conceive and raise a world. Feng Ran is domineering and arrogant, but he is born with the heart of the emperor. The metaphor of the emperor is compatible with the world, such as Fen Gran and Twilight. Speaking of the two heavenly emperors picked out by the fairy world, their consciences have passed. In the more than 100 years when Feng Ran was in charge of the immortal realm, apart from the expansion of the immortal clan, he only remembered two things: one was the soul-gathering sceneries, and the other was the small fire phoenix born against the sky by the Feng clan. Jingjian has been reborn for a long time, and now he can barely gather the 3 souls and 7 souls scattered in the wasteland of Kyushu, and it will take at least a few hundred years to take shape. However, the phoenix hidden in the ancient fire phoenix jade and phoenix tree ancestral tree, the soul is incredibly strong, and the soul can be transformed into form before the nirvana emerges. But her soul form is also the most fragile. If her soul has not been nirvana, she will be damaged. It is not the first time that she has walked around Wutong Island with the power of soul transforming her body. On weekdays, Wutong Island has the elders of the Feng clan sitting in town, and all kinds of bands and seals protect the island, but it is very safe. In the past few days, the guests from the 3 realms were full, and it was an accident. Feng Ran had ordered her to stay in the ancient phoenix tree, not to leave for half a step, but she still ran out secretly. Feng Yin has been able to transform the body with the power of the soul for decades. She was taught by Feng Ran herself, and her temperament naturally followed Feng Ran 9 times out of 10. But in comparison, there is less majesty and more playful innocence. Above the stone pavilion in the middle of the lake, the little Huo Feng turned into a 15 or 16-year-old girl under the gaze of Feng Gran, with sharp eyebrows and quite a wain-spiring. She had a red hairpin made of the fire phoenix jade in her hair bun, and she wore a navy blue ancient dress and was barefoot. Sitting cross-legged on the cloud, she looked at Feng Ran with no fear at all. Only in this posture, the honorable atmosphere of the successor of the Feng clan became natural. She smiled, and there was a very shallow dimple on her cheeks that looked like Feng Gran. "Master, I heard there is an old saying in the world." Feng Ran raised his hand to support his forehead, slowly raised his chin towards Feng Yin. "What's the matter?" Feng Yin snapped his fingers, and a crisp voice flew out, "This is what makes one person get to the heavens. I think that's what it is like to marry." She pointed down at Shitting, "These ladies of Baifujun for example, whoever marries the highest gate of Dongfu, whoever is in the immortal world will have a straight waist and a strong voice. I don't like to follow my husband's ostentation and ilk. If I want to do it, I will be the one who can ascend to heaven. I can bless the 3 realms, it is difficult for the 3 realms to shelter me." Feng Yin came from the line of the emperor of the Feng clan, let alone the lower 3 realms, even in the ancient realms, she was also a very noble background. Although she said this, she was arrogant, but she was not without qualifications. Little Phoenix was born with a calf, but Feng Ran didn't say a word. She tapped her fingertips on the sycamore wooden chair and stared at her with squinting eyes. Feng Yin's expression was over, with his hands on her chest, she turned her dark eyes towards Feng Ran. "Master, are you satisfied with my answer?" Feng Ran leaned over the triumphant Feng Yin's forehead and snapped his fingers, and reprimanded, "The elders are all gentle, but you are crazy and you don't know who you learned from. You are with Shai Jun, Fengjian is about 1/10,000th of the time that Shai Jun was." Feng Yin took advantage of Feng Gran's hand and stood up, transformed into a small fire phoenix shape, paused and stopped on her wrist, and his little head tapped. "Be cheerful, master, don't be angry, it's the top of our house anyway, no one would dare not open his eyes to provoke me. Little guy, pretend to be pitiful." Feng Ran stretched out to twist the back of little Huo Feng's neck and threw it into the sky. "I don't even bother to take care of you all the time." Feng Yin drew a circle neatly in the air, flapped his wings and nodded repeatedly, glanced at the excitement under the stone pavilion reluctantly, and flew towards the ancestral tree of the inner island sycamore with his little wings. Feng Ran was still sitting on the suspended wooden chair, staring at the direction the little Huofeng was flying away. Over the past 100 years, she has exhausted her efforts, but she has collected the 3 souls and 7 souls scattered in Jingjian. The road to rebirth of Jingjian is long and endless. All she can do is wait. Years are boundless, but every day can clearly remember the last sight of the man who passed away with his eyes closed in the sky above Rakshasa. It is unfortunate and fortunate to meet the right person in a lifetime, but it takes a long time to expect, such as her and the ancients. She still has some hope, at least Jingjian still has one day to come back. Is the reborn person in the primordial soul pool of the ancient realm Baiju? Who knows? Feng Yin, marriage is not as simple as you think. You have a temperament, and you will meet him someday, and I don't know if it is fortunate or unfortunate. The low sigh gradually became inaudible, and the Phoenix Emperor, who had experienced the world's love, disappeared together with the Phoenix tree chair. The sky above the stone pavilion was full of stars, bright and bright, as if no one had ever appeared before. Kuching swayed all the way, and even the only right road was turned off. Not only did it fail to reach the lake at the junction of the inner and outer islands, but instead went backwards into the ancient forest of Wutong. The night moon hangs high, and the cobblestone path is ancient and quiet. The little fat man hummed a small tune and walked like a crab. Not far from a resting place surrounded by a rockery, he heard the sound of neither high nor low. Ling Wan, you said that you would come to Nanshan Cave Mansion to beg me when I was 500 years old. I was 500 years old 3 years ago. Why didn't you keep your promise? The slightly angry female voice faintly sounded, and Kuching's ear moved, and the cat walked quietly towards the rockery. The female fairy is forced to marry, this is a rare thing, he has to take a good look. Baiun, this matter can't be anxious. My father has been playing chess with the Dragon King in Zihai Dragon Palace a few days ago. He played a game of chess for 5 years. It's not that I haven't returned to Bodhi Mountain. If I go to Nanshan alone to propose marriage, your father will think that I'm not sincere and want to ruin your reputation. The man's voice was gentle, but somewhat unrealistic. Kuching glanced over his head, picking his eyes. The female gentleman in the green undergarment had a thin face with anger, and a pair of willow eyebrows stared at the white male fairy with affectionate eyebrows. Kuching watched after climbing on the rockery for a long time, and it can be concluded that the appearance of this male immortal monarch is really not good. Tian Kai vowed to say that the one in the 3 realms who can compete with him has not been born yet. This shows how handsome he was born. All such female fairies are forced to marry. After he is shocked by the heavens and the earth at the birthday banquet tomorrow, the female fairies who want to marry will not squeeze Day's mountain? In fact, Aki really thought a little bit more. When he was a child, he had a face similar to Baiju, and it would be good for someone in the fairy demon to look up at him. As for now, after one fat covers hundreds of beauty, and after he has been raised round and round, the words of praise can only be used on him at most. The son of the ancestor of Bodhi, who is flirting with the young lady of Nanshan Cave House, is now standing in the Wutong forest, but he is also a good-looking beautiful man, but it is a pity that there is a bit of exaggeration in his eyes, and it is difficult to hold the scene. After hearing these pleasing words of relief, Baiun Xianjun's expression obviously eased, and she turned to look at Lingwan Xianjun, don't lie to me anymore. If you don't come on my birthday next year, my father will take me betrothed to Liangzi of Kunlun Cave House. Lingwan quickly promised not, but Baiun no longer let him fool around, complaining, my sister said that the only brothers in the Bodhi Cave Mansion are you who have not married yet. The ancestor of Bodhi is now waiting for the little boy in Wutong Island. If Fengjun Nirvana comes to the world, if she is a female baby, she will go to Wutong Island to beg for you in a few hundred years. Do you think my sister is right? A touch of embarrassment pierced his mind, flashed across Ling Wan's eyes, his face was stern, and he pretended to be angry. Baiun, Xiao Feng Jun has not yet nirvana, it takes hundreds of thousands of years to become an adult. Where did you hear that? Gossip. Baiyun snorted, you think I don't know? Most of the immortal monarchs who entered Wutong Island were led by the elders of the family this time, saying it was a congratulation. He didn't want the children in the Dongfu to pass before His Majesty. Look high, let alone hundreds of years, I am afraid that for thousands of years, there will be people willing to wait. Even Hua Shu's arrogant temperament has come to Wutong Island. It can be seen that she is also afraid that the born Xiao Fengjun is a female doll, that fairy world in the future, the status and reputation of the female fairy will have nothing to do with her. Even if Xiao Fengjun is an ordinary and ugly, she is afraid that she is not comparable to her Huashu. Ling Wan, we have made an oath under the Yula Shu, you will not. It's really for that Xiao Fengjun to come to Wutong Island in a brisk way, right? The Fire and Phoenix line is a born emperor, marrying her is equivalent to sitting on the entire Feng clan, and can still be favored by the emperor, who in the immortal world does not want. Kuching stood on tiptoe and listened to the corner, but I did not expect that the little fire phoenix on Indus Island was so popular, and my heart was itchy. I hope to see what the fire phoenix of Nirvana looks like tomorrow. By convention, this Feng clan Xiao Fengjun should be his divine beast. He must guard his rare baby, don't let others take it away. Kuching feels very distressed when he touches his chin, or he will steal it back from Feng Ran without waiting for it to become a nirvana. If it's really a woman, do you want to raise the baby as a daughter-in-law? Chapter 8. In the open space surrounded by the rockery, Ling Wan heard Baiyun's complaint, and hurriedly grabbed her hand and whispered to comfort, where did you think about it? I only have you in my heart. When father returns to the Bodhi cave, I beg him to go. Nanshan proposes marriage. Nanshan Baijian Shangjun and Sifang Emperor had a good relationship and couldn't easily offend him. He knew Baiyun before, and now it seemed that he had to abandon the site of Wutong Island. Hey, if he knew that Jun Xiaofeng had achieved nirvana so early, he wouldn't have made a private appointment with Baiyun for a lifetime. Baiyun saw that Ling Wan spoke nicely, but his expression was a bit reluctant, and he casually said, Ling Wan, Xiao Fengjun is noble, except for the little of Qingqi Palace, where is there a fairy in the three realms who can match? Sure? Don't be delusional, thinking about who you are. If I marry you, can I only ask you for it? Baiyun is a proud and arrogant lord, born beautiful, and he is always begged by all monarchs. With a little temperament, what he says is a bit arrogant and unpleasant. The most unbearable thing for a man is that his sweetheart compares it with other men, not to mention that it is a milk doll that has only appeared once in hundreds of years. Ling Juan's face sank immediately, and he was a little bit reluctant to say, you said that Yuan Qi from Qingqi Palace? He is so comfortable with such a big name. As soon as these words came out, the inside and outside of the rockery suddenly became quiet. When Kuching saw the flames of war inadvertently burned on himself, he was a bit surprised. He frowned, and for the first time looked seriously at the menacing spirit not far away. Ling Wan. Baiyun looked a little flustered, looked around and whispered, how can you arrogantly talk about that god? Seeing Baiyun's temper tantrum, Ling Wan was even more proud. The two worlds are separated, he enjoys respect in the ancient world, but can he still know what I have said and failed? Baiyun, you are too careful, he just made a good vote. A fetus will be better at birth. If he is also an ordinary fairy, how can he be able to get me? Besides, what if he has a good fetus? It's not that his father died early, and his mother abandoned each other. Shut up! The boy's cold voice sounded abruptly outside the path, interrupting the self-confident conversation between the two. Ling Wan and Baiyun were both shocked, and turned around quickly, waiting to see Kuching standing under the moonlight. They were all taken aback. This fairy king also looks a little too round. Fairies are mostly beautiful, so where is there such a disregard for looks? 80% is a low-level disciple of Witch Mountain Gate. Ling Wan felt relieved, and even if this fat fairy prince said his words, others might not believe him. Who are you? Why are you eavesdropping here? Ling Wan preemptively pulled the bewildered Baiyun aside and shouted towards Kuching. If what you say is frank, you will be afraid of being heard. This is Wutong Island. If it is not your Bodhi cave, what qualifications do you have to teach the Lord? Kuching walked out of the path, his face full of anger. Baiju the True was martyred for the three realms 100 years ago, how can you put your beak? The second generation ancestors have arrogant capital. How could Ling Wan be frightened by a fat fairy of unknown origin? His face hummed, you have cultivated nonsense, when did I put my beak on the true Baiju, but I am not used to it. That's the pretending little in Qi Gong. Oh, why? He offended you. Kuching walked up to the two of them, staring at him coldly. Living in Kuching is a bit high-end, so naturally I don't know what some people don't need to do. It would be disgusting to stay here. For example, there is also Feng Yin who is about to come out of the shell. If you talk about this, they are really a match made in heaven. In fact, the two of them should have been together in their own cave and played with the family as soon as they were born. They came out to pull out hatred, but it is a pity that he and Feng Yin didn't realize it at all. Sex. Ling Wan was staring a little bit distressed, and he stabilized his mind and snorted, I'm just telling the truth. I heard that the little at the Donghua Lao Shangjun birthday banquet more than 100 years ago was also present. Obviously, however, he was 100 years old, but he made the immortals bow their heads and was very arrogant. He was young, but he was domineering by the power of two gods. If he were not born in Qingqi Palace, how could he have such glory? Kuching visited Day's Mountain with the ancients when he was not changing things. Although he was not humble, he did not do anything to make a lot of old immortals bow their heads. What Ling Huan said was just spreading falsehood, so there is nothing wrong with it. But he couldn't refute that all those who were able to participate in the birthday banquet in Day's Mountain were the elders of the immortal clan. He promised apocalypse when he was in the lower realm and would never reveal his identity before returning to the ancient realm. Seeing Kuching's silence, Ling Wan was even more arrogant, and laughed, which cave are you from? The little of Qingqi Palace is noble and extraordinary, but he is rare in the ancient world for tens of thousands of years. You make Jingxian, I am not afraid that I will not live so long. Besides. Ling Wan walked to Kuching, glanced at him contemptuously, and shook the folding fan in his hand, a person who is abandoned by the parents of heaven and earth, is there any good vassal? As soon as these words came out, the rockery was dead quiet inside and outside. Baiyun was shocked by the swords of the two and turned pale. She was even more panicked at this time. She pulled Ling Juan's sleeve and reprimanded, Ling Wan, what are you talking about? There are no real secrets in the three realms, Baiyun has heard of some past events over 100 years ago. The little in Qingqi Palace was in great chaos when he was born. A well-known wedding in the realm of the sky caused the ancient to die by the hands of the true Beiju. Since then, the unawakened ancient gods and the true gods of Beiju are not at the same time, and they are too tired. The name taboo of the little is also changed from the word discard. But knowing Gui knows that if the three realms fairy demon is not tired of life, who would dare to mention this, let alone the truth about the death of the world after the true Baiju took on the chaos of the chaos. Although Baiyun is a bit petty, she is not a person of right and wrong, and the absurd words that Ling Wan blurted out make her look a little bit off. She cautiously looked at the fat Xianjun with an unusual look on the opposite side, and banged the snare drum in her heart. If this Xianjun spread Ling Wan's words, even if she didn't say anything, Nanshan Cave Mansion would be spurned by the three realms. Kuching has lived for more than 100 years. After some things, he grew up stumbling. But there are always two dead knots in his heart that cannot be solved. Apart from Tianqi in the world, I am afraid that even Feng Ran would not dare to mention it easily. Two things, the name taken for him by the ancients when he was born, and the death of his father Baiju. Even if Yuan Qi knew all the past and the truth 100 years later, what if he could understand what happened? Being able to forgive does not mean that there is no harm or regret. He was abandoned by his parents after all, and maybe even the rest of his life may not have the opportunity to call that person godfather. The wound that Kuching had hidden in his heart for 100 years was uprooted without warning, dripping with blood. The corners of his lips were slightly pursed, his hands hanging down and shaking tightly. He forgot to argue for a while. Although the true Beiju died, the ancient true gods are still there. Lord Lingwan, since you are so concerned about the origin of the name of the little in Qingqi Palace, why not take a trip to Wenshan Road and ask the ancient gods to understand yourself? Asked her son if he was abandoned by Tiandi's parents and not worthy of being respected by the immortals. The faint female voice suddenly sounded, and the mist made people unrealistically heard, but the words were pearly, and did not leave the slightest affection for Ling Wan. The three of them all turned their heads, only to see one person leaning against the rockery with his hands in his arms. In the moonlight, only one corner of the fiery red dress robe was exposed. Wenshan Road is a stone road left at the immortal demon enchantment when the ancient true gods closed the gate of the ancient world. It is said that if the stone drum at the end of the heavenly road is sounded, the injustices in the world can go directly to the ancient world, and the true gods of the ancient world can be invited to preside over justice. But in the past 100 years of this world, there has never been a fairy or a demon. For no other reason, you will be attacked by 9 days of thunder. If it were not for the shocking injustice, who would walk this road of Hades in a hurry? He didn't dare to give Ling Wan 100 fat courage to ask the ancient true gods. Does anyone know that the temperament of the heavenly emperor is the same as that of the ancient gods? After being drunk immediately, and being confused about who was hiding behind the rockery, Ling Wan finally became sober. Cold sweat hit her back, her mouth opened and she didn't know how to answer the conversation. Why? Don't you dare? Just now you were not ashamed of burying the little of Qingqi Palace, now let you go to Wenshanlu and ask the ancient gods yourself. When will the Bodhi Cave House only teach you such a child who is not so right and wrong? The vague voice came out coldly, although it sounded young, it was somewhat hostile and majestic. It was only a few steps away from the ancient phoenix tree. Feng Yin flew back from the center of the lake, just in time to hear Ling Wan's bad words. Seeing that the little fat gentleman couldn't make a fart for a long time, he had to transform into an exit to help. Yuan Qi of Qingqi Palace was brought up by her master, so if she counted as half of her brother in the world, she naturally couldn't let others bury him behind their backs. Although Feng Yin had never been out of Wutong Island, she grew up next to Feng Ran. She learned her tone of voice to 10%, and she gave people a stern look, and a single sentence bluffed the spirit. Ling Wan became angry, but he didn't dare to be presumptuous anymore, so he had to move out his father's name. Who are you? How dare to insult me at Bodhi Mountain Gate? Why don't you dare, just say what you just said before the ancestor. If he doesn't cure you of such a rebellious rebellion, I will bow to you after the banquet tomorrow in front of the immortals on Wutong Island and give you tea and call your ancestor. Just watch. Do you dare to gamble with Ben Jun? This is arrogant. Sure, Ling Wan will be a cannon fodder tomorrow, but it turns out to be the truth. Kuching blinked, staring at Ling's trembling appearance, and suddenly relieved his breath. He really turned around more and more alive, and he was confused by a few words of Ling Chuan. When a person lives in the world, no one can rejoice in life, even if it is his father and mother, it is difficult to do so. When a female doll was relieved, Kuching became curious about the female fairy behind the rockery. With such an unbearable temperament, I don't know which girl raised in Dongfu. You. Ling Wan was forced to retreat, his face was blue and purple, and as soon as he flicked his sleeves, he wanted to step forward and pull out the people behind the rockery, but was hurriedly pulled by Baiun. Baiun calmed Ling Wan, bowed to the hidden fiery red figure, and cautiously probed, "Little girl Nanshan Baiun, dare you to ask your excellency, but 100 Bird Island Huashu?" Ling Wan heard Baiun's guess, his face changed, and he flushed immediately. He didn't expect that the female fairy in Wutong Island would dare to question him like this, and there was only one Princess Huashu. Huashu's name resounded throughout the immortal world. He had admired him for a long time, but he didn't want to meet for the first time in such a tit-for-tat situation. Ling Wan repented secretly in her heart, and the anger in her eyes receded, leaving only embarrassment. Is it really Huashu? Even if Gu Xiaopeng never went out of Day's Mountain, he knew the existence of Peacock Island Princess Huashu, who was famous in the fairy world for nearly 100 years. He raised his head and looked behind the rockery. He didn't see the appearance of the female fairy, and he was a little regretful in his heart. Hidden behind the rockery, Feng Yin raised her eyebrows. She always did not change her name and sat and did not change her surname. She even disdains to make trouble for others by pretending to be a person. She snorted and was about to speak. Chapter 9. Before the words were spoken, there was a phoenix sound above the phoenix forest, and two giant colorful phoenixes flew towards the largest phoenix ancestor tree in the forest. It seems that Shijun sent the elders to see if she had returned to the nest obediently, or waited for tomorrow after Nirvana to discuss the right and wrong with this ancestor in front of Bodhi. The three people waiting to answer after the rockery turned into a red light and flew towards the ancestral phoenix tree. No one noticed Feng Yin's disappearance under the dim moonlight, and the three of them waited for a long while, but there was still a moment of silence behind the rockery. Baiyun glanced suspiciously and then winked at Ling Wan. Ling Wan stepped forward and saw that there was no one behind the rockery. The arrogant female fairy had already disappeared. The two looked at each other and looked at each other. There wasn't even a trace of divine power fluctuations between this person's coming and going. Who else could the young female fairy on the island have besides Princess Huashu, whose fairy power was close to Shang Jun? They couldn't guess that Feng Yin was just wandering in Wutong Island with a ray of soul, transforming into form and coming and going without a trace. Ling Wan felt frustrated and sighed that he was unlucky today, and he no longer controlled Kuching, which was standing on the sidelines, and hurriedly left Gulin with Baiyun. The Wutong forest, which was still arguing just now, quieted down. Kuching stepped forward and looked at behind the rockery for a while, suddenly feeling a little panic in his heart. That person didn't admit that she was Huashu, maybe someone else. Why did she suddenly disappear? Could something happen? Kuching flew to the rockery without saying a word, pestered his chin and quietly began to wait. He insisted on staying on the rock that Feng Yin was leaning against, always feeling that she would show up after a while. If he stayed sober and immediately got up to ask Feng Ran, he might know that the arrogant female fairy was the divine beast he was thinking of. It's a pity that people always have a terrible stubbornness when they are young. Kuching feels that this is fate. He held his fat body in the ancient forest of Wutong and became a stone of hope for his wife. His Royal Highness, immortal Ling Wan is really unstoppable, and he dared to bury the two true gods behind his back. What do you think the hidden female fairy belongs to? In the pavilion not far from the rockery, Xian Yi in a light yellow dress poured a cup of fairy brew for the sitting female fairy. However, although the person has a good tone, he only dared to use his highness's reputation to bluff people. Little mad. Is it true to use the flag to bluff people or to disdain to answer? I'm not sure now. I don't sound like a slapstick person. Such a temper must be rare. It should be an upstart in the Dongfu. It will naturally be seen at the dinner tomorrow. Out. A plain hand stretched out and took a sip from the white jade cup on the stone table. In the circling heat, you can see that the hand is slender and the white fat is condensed. Looking up again, hey, her face is like a plum, dignified and luxurious, and she is dressed in an elegant white dress. Huashu, the princess of Baniao Island, who is well known in the three realms, really lives up to her reputation. Only when the faint eyebrows inadvertently flicked over with a reserved touch, can I realize that this majesty may not be someone who can get close to others. His Royal Highness, Ling Wan Xianjun will see you tomorrow, so she must be frightened. The slave and maid will play tricks on him tomorrow. Huashu's maid, cardinals, is used to some noisy ideas. Naughty! Hua Shu put down the white jade cup and lightly scolded, Father and Fei Peng King Jinli have always been at odds. The two races have been fighting for a long time. Bodhi Mountain is close to the North Sea. Whoever can make good friends with Bodhi ancestors can be more powerful than Bahai. Even if he speaks falsely, he is also the beloved son of Bodhi's ancestors, and angering Bodhi's cave will only make Baniao Island into a dilemma. Yes. The cardinal replied with a startled sound. He looked up and saw Kuching on the stone not far away looking at the moon. He said, "This fat fairy dared to ask Ling Wanxian, he is a bit bolder." "Your Highness." Seeing that he is still sitting there, I guess he thinks that the female fairy is you, knowing that your Highness rarely appears in front of others, so I dare not go to Liayun Pavilion to thank you, I want to stay here and try my luck. Hua Shu raised her eyes and followed the hand of the cardinals, only to see the round black shadows under the moonlight. Her brows were slightly frowned, and she casually retracted her eyes, without even looking at it again. Don't worry about it. If the person shows up tomorrow, they will naturally know that they guessed the wrong person. Seeing Hua Shu's lack of interest, the cardinals said in a low voice, His Royal Highness, I heard that Lord Lanfan entered the island in the evening, and it was the second elder of the Feng clan who came out to meet him personally. Hua Shu's eyebrows twitched, and there was a bit of fireworks in his eyes. Shang Jun Lanfan is honorable, and it is reasonable for Elder Fengqi to go to meet him. She paused, and asked, Shang Jun is with someone by your side? Among the younger generation in the fairy world, it is really rare for Hua Shu to care about the presence of no one by his side. But if you know the origin of this Lord Lanfeng, I'm afraid everyone will smile and sigh. Feng Huang is a neat, free, and sturdy temperament. She entered the heavenly palace because of the love of the predecessor, Twilight. 50 years ago, after the immortal clan got through the crisis, the Phoenix Emperor deliberately passed on the position of Heavenly Emperor to the Supreme Lord Jin Yao. However, the Supreme Lord Jin Yao was dedicated to pursuing the divine way. In the past few decades, it has been said in the immortal world that Lanfeng Shangjun of Jingyu Palace was the last person chosen by the Emperor to travel to the immortal world. Lanfeng Shangjun has pure roots, and he has been promoted to the throne at the age of 500. His spirituality is even better than that of the Phoenix Emperor. He is also destined to serve as the Emperor. He is fair and kind, and has the same temperament as Twilight, although only 2,000 years old, but the Emperor Feng relied on him, and the immortals respected him. Such a background, with a good appearance and temperament, and has not yet married, naturally became a satisfactory candidate for the good son-in-law of the immortal giants. Hua Shu is wise to put his mind on him. In terms of respect for position, high power of immortality, and integrity of character, Lanfan is at the top of the young immortal monarch. The cardinal glanced at Hua Shu, and stretched his tone, His Royal Highness. Except for the fairy boy who followed Lanfan Shangjun, there is not a female fairy, so you can rest assured. Poor mouth. Hua Shu glanced horizontally at the cardinals, but did not hide the smile between his eyebrows and eyes, rubbing his hand on the white jade cup unconsciously. The cardinals smiled and said, His Royal Highness, we have been in Wutong Island for several days, and we haven't taken a good look at the scenery on the island. It's early today. Why don't we go to the outer islands for a walk? Although His Royal Highness belongs to Lord Lanfeng, he has only one side. This is a great opportunity. It would be a good thing if he could meet with him. There are all the immortals on the island. I won't leave Baniao Island for a long time. It's okay to go for a walk. Hua Shu put down the white jade cup, got up and walked out of the pavilion towards the forest. Kuching in a daze. In the ancestral tree of the phoenix tree, Feng Yin yawned boredly after dealing with the elders. She looked down at Gu Xiaopeng who was waiting like a petrified person not far away, narrowed her eyes, and passed a smile. So stupid, it's no wonder that I couldn't say a word when I was choked by Ling Chuan, but the dongju on his waist was more transparent and brighter than the color of the East Sea Dragon King's crown. It shouldn't have just popped out from the ground, waiting for tomorrow. I cross-examined and asked Shai Jun, who is the parent of the fat boy who knows nothing about the world. In the stone pavilion in the middle of the lake, the immortal monarchs who met were talking happily. I don't know who said a word. The topic jumped from the three princesses of the South China Sea, Jinyun, to Xiao Feng Jun, who is about to be born in Nirvana. The future Emperor Feng is also passed down from the line of the Emperor of Heaven. Who in the three realms of this glory can be related? They can quietly say a few sour words when talking about Huashu on weekdays, but this little Feng Jun from Wutong Island, apart from their admiration, it is really hard to find other words to cover them. Jinyun, if Xiao Feng Jun who is born tomorrow is a female doll, then our fairy world will be lively. Female gentleman Hui has always been outspoken, and a single sentence caused the male fairy who was talking to also look over here. Oh? Why did Sister Hui say that? Jinyun asked. Hui Yi looked towards Liu Yun Pavilion meaningfully, and the willow fan in her hand swayed gently, refusing to say anything. Mu Rong, who hadn't spoken for a long time, laughed loudly, and a loud voice resounded through Shi Ting, "You don't know the third sister, the ancient True entered Wutong Island for Xiao Feng Jun 100 years ago, and left a piece of fire phoenix jade for Xiao Feng Jun. Protect the soul. The fire phoenix jade is passed down from the ancient times and is a thing of the ancestor god. Xiao Feng Jun is blessed and must be extraordinary from birth." She paused, and the smile in her eyes was extremely sincere. Our Xiao Feng Jun's life is true. It can be regarded as a blessing to invite heaven. If she is a female doll, within the three realms, there is no female monarch comparable, and who will dare to ask in the future. When Huashu came to the world, because of a vision in the sky, he was praised by the immortals to invite him to the sky. In the future, he will be very precious. Now he is a little lacking in confidence when compared with Xiao Feng Jun, who is about to nirvana. How could the women not understand the deep meaning of Mu Rong's words, and they looked a little gloating in the direction of Liu Yun Pavilion. 100 years after Jing Zhao disappeared, the daughters of the fairy clan were overwhelmed by Huashu's prestige. They finally got a chance, and they wanted to breathe a sigh of relief. Under the stone bridge outside the pavilion, the cardinals who heard the words "Invite Heaven" looked at Huashu, who stopped, with an angry and anxious expression. These female princes greet each other with smiles on weekdays, but they don't want to be so odious behind their backs. Huashu's complexion remained unchanged, and his dark eyes couldn't see his emotions, but his hands hidden in the embroidery pendulum gently clenched. Inside the stone pavilion, unbridled laughter reached the ears of the master and servant. Sister Mu Rong is wrong. Although we have no female monarchs in the fairy world, after hundreds of years, there is still a monarch who is qualified to marry Xiao Feng Jun. Oh? Sister Hui said. Master Lan Feng. If it is him, your majesty may not refuse. The cardinal's face under the stone pavilion changed drastically, and Huashu had already turned around and headed towards Liu Yun Pavilion on the inner island. His Royal Highness. The cardinal whispered and hurriedly followed. Huashu suddenly stopped, looking at the direction of the end of the stone bridge in amazement. The cardinals looked up at some unknown reason under the moonlight. At the end of the stone bridge, Lan Feng Shangjun, dressed in blue clothes, was walking towards the two of them. He apparently heard the conversation in the pavilion just now, and a deep color flicked between his eyebrows. The cardinal looked overjoyed and was about to speak, but was blocked by Huashu. She led the cardinals in a silent salute to make way. The moment Lan Feng walked sideways, the loneliness and sadness in her eyes was fleeting, just right. Sure enough, the cyan clothes stopped in the peripheral light, and a gentle voice sounded. The elder Fengqi just now said that this year's Liu Yun Pavilion's pear blossom blooming scene is rare for 10 years. I wonder if the princess can let my lord come to take a look. Huashu raised his head, looked at the elegant and handsome face in front of him, smiling vigorously. Huashu is lucky to be invited by the Lord. In the early morning of the second day, the disciple Mimi from Day's Mountain in Zhuhua Pavilion slept and finally discovered the horrible fact that her fat teacher had not returned to the nest. Several frightened nephews of the Whitebeard were crying bitterly. He broke into the Phoenix Palace, begging the Phoenix Emperor to search Wutong Island and look for Daisishan's missing treasure Shishu. Chapter 10 The guests on Wutong Island will not have time to be bathed in the early morning sunshine. The young Donghua Shangjun disappeared. The immortals of Day's Mountain appealed to Feng Huang to search the whole island, and finally found in the Wutong forest, turning their belly to sleep. The energetic fairy king of Kuching, this series of news spread quickly across the island like wings. Early in the morning, Kuching became a chatter for the immortals to ridicule after dinner. As an immortal, I have to say that the debut of Dai Shan, a very senior elder, is really shameful. However, the old Dragon King of the South China Sea, who was in the Fenghuang Hall and Fen Ground teasing tea, heard the news and did not punish the younger generation who caused the riots in Wutong Island. He only lightly reprimanded him, "Don't worry about him, he is used to fooling around." There was a whisper in my heart. Donghua Lao Shangjun and the Emperor of Heaven had a good relationship, did he even get the favor of the Emperor of Heaven with this little apprentice? The old Dragon King is a luminous person. As soon as he left the Phoenix Palace, he ordered the disciples and grandchildren who followed him to keep his mouth in check, and must not arbitrarily tell the right and wrong of Kuching. Everyone has 3 relatives and 6 reasons, but at noon, the slightest maintenance of Kuching in the words of the Emperor of Heaven has been thoroughly eaten by the immortals on the island. Hearing the sound and knowing Yi, Kuching hadn't heard about it all morning, and after knowing that Huashu was living in Liuyun Pavilion, which was separated by a wall, he smiled and ran all the way to stop by. Without knowing that his absurd behavior last night, in the mouths of the immortals, he became a model of unobtrusive young man's heart. Liuyun Pavilion has been quiet and elegant for several days, but today is very different. The female gentlemen who gathered on Wutong Island chose to visit Huashu before the dinner on the last day. The girls met in the outer hall, and after an awkward smile, they forgot the conversation of last night vividly. The cardinals smiled, and invited all the women to sit down and serve tea and then go to the back hall to invite Huashu. Pushing open the door of the back hall, and seeing Huashu who is changing clothes behind the screen, the smile on the cardinal's face is a little more public and proud. "His Royal Highness, all the fairy princes on the island have come to see you, and they are waiting outside." Now, they kept climbing on Xiao Fengjun on Wutong Island last night, and now they don't want to take advantage of His Highness's reputation to sit in with His Highness. In the past banquets in the fairy world, the female monarchs who followed Huashu can always get other fairy monarchs to take a high look. That's because they are not sure whether Xiao Fengjun who is in nirvana today is a male or a female. If it is a female Fengjun, when she grows up, I am afraid that my former situation will not be there. Huashu walked out from behind the screen, a faintly invisible deep meaning flicked across his eyebrows, just like when Jing Zhao was in the Tiangong. The cardinal was silent, his face changed slightly, remembering a past event that year. When His Royal Highness Huashu was born, he was engulfed by the clouds of the North Sea, the sea beasts were full of joy, and the sharks sang music, which can be described as a miracle in the fairy world. Your Majesty treats the princess like a jewel, and the princess gathers thousands of pets on Baniao Island, and she is naturally arrogant. 200 years ago, the peaches feasted in Tiangong, and the princess entered the Tiangong to participate in the feast at the beginning of her adulthood. At that time, people in the fairy world had said that the princess would not lose the daughter of the Emperor Jing Zhao when she grew up. For that banquet, the princess asked the women of the clan to prepare a 1,000-year silk wing shirt and wear the peacock clan's most precious peacock feather crown. At the banquet, Princess Jing Zhao sucked the eyes of all the immortals in her golden dragon and yellow robe. The immortals liked the princess's appearance, but compared to Princess Jing Zhao, they lacked sincere respect. At the banquet, when a fairy monarch mentioned Huashu on Baniao Island, Princess Jing Zhao, who was sitting next to Tianhou, cast a half eye and said to the princess, "Sure enough, it lives up to the rumors, the beauty of the sky, the beauty of the peony." A fluttering boast seemed to be rewarded to His Royal Highness only when she was pleased, and in the eyes of Princess Jingzhao, the arrogant and conceited His Royal Highness was nothing more than a beautiful fairy king who wins with his capacity, no different from ordinary people. His Highness's efforts for hundreds of years seemed to be completely ruined in an instant, not worth mentioning. The daughter of the Emperor of Heaven can be born above the 9 heavens, sitting next to the throne of the Emperor. It was at that banquet that the princess met Lord Lanfeng, who had first gained fame. Love at first sight, unforgettable for 100 years. The world's reincarnation is reversed, and it is always difficult to predict the future fate. After this banquet, His Highness changed his temperament. But I didn't want to change everything in the 3 realms in the next 100 years. The Emperor of Heaven was transformed into a stone dragon, and the Queen was punished by the ancient true gods. The Princess Jingzhao, who was overwhelming the 3 realms at that time, disappeared. If something shouldn't be said, if Princess Jingzhao is still there, it is indeed difficult for your Highness to have the same scenery as it is today. It's a pity that after 100 years, another Xiao Fengjun appeared on Wutong Island. The cardinals pressed down and sighed with emotion, pretending to be indifferent to comforting Huashu, His Royal Highness, the one who nirvana tonight may not be a female doll, and even if it is, it will take several hundred years for her to reach adulthood. Last night Lanfeng Shangjun and His Royal Highness, it's also a good opportunity for you to enjoy tea and flowers and talk for a half night. It's a coincidence that you have met Lord Lanfeng in the heart of the lake. I heard that although Shangjun is kind to the female monarch, he rarely takes the initiative. Befriended, I didn't know why I took my heart to the princess last night. Huashu walked to the door and paused when she heard this. She turned her head and laughed softly. It happens? Cardinal, you know the reason why Twilight was chosen by the ancient gods as the Lord of the Heavens tens of thousands of years ago. Your Majesty, the servants don't know. Because the previous Emperor Twilight served as the Emperor, so he was selected by the ancient gods. His Royal Highness said. Lanfeng came from Penglai Island in the fairy world, and he was born with the fate of the Emperor's star. He was born 2,000 years ago. More than 1,900 years ago. Have you ever heard someone in the fairy world dare to compare him with the previous emperor? Is he from a noble background? The cardinal shook his head. Although Lord Lanfeng is one of the best talents in the world, it has been the past century that has truly won the praise and respect of the immortals. Even if someone has never spoken bluntly, you should know who the next emperor of the immortal world is. The cardinal stomped and replied, the slave maid knows, he is the second prince of Tiangong, His Royal Highness Jingjian. Regarding the power of immortality, His Highness Jingjian and Shangjun Lanfen, who had not gone to Rax Hadi, were afraid of being inferior, but in terms of prestige, Shangjun Lanfen was far less than His Highness Jingjian. Both parents are gods who control the heavens, and His Royal Highness Jingjian comes from the line of Phoenix. Under such circumstances, no one can remember Lanfeng Shangjun of Penglai Island, even though he was the heir who came to the world with the fate of the emperor. The thing that Lanfeng dislikes the most is the immortal clan's jokes of stepping on the low and high. They have made friends with me, but they feel the same, just 4 words. After Huashu finished speaking, he raised his eyes to look at the golden sun outside the door, and smiled slightly towards the outsider. At the Pan Peach banquet 200 years ago, she knew that no matter how hard she puts in, she can only tremble on thin ice in front of high-powered people, and some are born to be superior. She was like that back then, so why not Lanfeng? The moon-white dress was lightly fluttering in the sun, and the gentle and kind smile on Huashu's face was as magnificent and charming as the red iris at the other end of the ghost world. Huashu's back disappeared into the corridor, and the cardinals looked dazed and sighed. Now that the noble Lord Lanfen is the heir to the Emperor of Heaven, and His Royal Highness has admired him for 100 years, he has chosen the right person. She retracted her mind, raised her brows with a silly smile that didn't know the world, and followed her. It was the last day, and Huashu's Liuyun pavilion naturally had many male immortals to visit. When she appeared, the front hall was full of guests. Her slender figure only pointed at the door and grabbed the eyes of the whole house. The ancient moon-white dress, the blue hairpin hair, a golden silk ribbon on the waist, and a beautiful cold face, Huashu looked elegant and luxurious, a fairy spirit far above the lady in the hall. The Princess Huashu, who was taught by the power of the Peacock King collection, has a well-deserved reputation for her beauty and fairy power. There are some female fairies in the hall who are envious, and some are jealous, but their faces are all filled with smiles and Huashu's greetings. In a short time, there was laughter in the hall, and there was noisy atmosphere. In this atmosphere, Kuching's request for advice was unexpected. After a moment of surprise, Huashu smiled and asked Xian Yi to invite the immortal Kuching from Days Shan to come in. The footsteps approached, it sounded a bit heavy, all the kings looked up at the door, all startled. The red robe was wrapped around the round body of the visitor, nearly reaching the ground. The bun on his head was slightly scattered, and his eyes were sunken by the flesh on his face, only a seam was exposed. Fat Xianjun walked in small steps, with this red robe, like a beaming civil bridegroom official. The monarchs couldn't speak, staring at the comfortable Kuching in the hall, and it was very difficult to bury the surprise in their eyes and the absurdity in their hearts. The story has been spreading for several days, and the island is full of restlessness. The young boy who has been so beloved by the Lord Donghua is actually like this, cough. To know that the old master of Donghua has not accepted a disciple for 1,000 years, it is even more difficult to reach the sky by visiting the gate of Days Mountain. The monarchs patrolled Kuching for a while, and in their hearts they all silently raised the idea of re-entering Days Mountain to worship. Under the coughing and secret laughter one after another, no one noticed the sudden pale face of Lady Baiun in Nanshan Cave Mansion. She leaned back slightly, as if trying to hide her body. Today Ling Wan was afraid of facing Huashu, so she didn't dare to come to see him. She could only come to see Huashu in person to beg for mercy, and she thought that the fat Xianjun who was insulted by Ling Chuan last night was the young Days Mountain who even the Emperor of Heaven defended. All three realms know that the little gods of Qingqi Palace were brought up by the Emperor himself. If Kuching tells the Emperor of what they said last night, Bodhi Cave and Nanshan will be abandoned by the immortals. Thinking of this, Baiun regretted not having it at the beginning, and her lips trembled with horror, but she lifted the teacup on the table to cover her gaffe. Above the main hall, Huashu glanced at Baiun, and there was also a strange color across his eyes. She personally got up and entered Kuching to welcome her. Donghua Shangjun is a generation older than his father. Although Kuching is so full, the seniority is really high. Yesterday I heard the cardinals say that Kuching immortal monarch rested in Zhuhua Pavilion. Huashu will not have time to go to see him in the future. Immortal monarch has come to Liuyun Pavilion. It is Huashu's not. Although Huashu personally greeted him, he faced him. His expression is still light and calm, and there is not much enthusiasm, and he treats Kuching and the monarchs the same. The voice came to my ears, somewhat similar to the neat female voice of last night, but not exactly the same. Kuching scratched his head and was not sure. He raised his eyes and looked at Huashu who was walking. His small eyes suddenly narrowed, and his heart screamed, "What a beautiful beauty, no wonder there is a bodhisattva heart." He coughed shyly, followed Huashu's guidance to take the seat, blinked a little nervously and slightly, and spoke solemnly. "It doesn't matter, it doesn't matter. The princess is older and I am young. I should be the first to visit the princess." As soon as this remark came out, the whole room was quiet.